Most of the tile, shingle, and corrugated metal roofs are damaged. The concrete structures withstand the storm well, although windows are broken and damaged. There are no military casualties from the storm since most of the troops remain indoors in the stronger buildings, safe from the falling trees and power lines. But among the Japanese in the storm's path, 135 are killed, over 1,000 injured, and over 200,000 made homeless. The heaviest military damage is suffered by wooden and tar paper buildings. These tropical storms are expected near the Sea of Japan at this time of the year. October 17 is a suspenseful day for the U.S. 1st Cavalrymen as they advance into the outskirts of Pyongyang, capital city of North Korea. The city is known to be heavily fortified, and it is expected that the Reds will make a death stand for their capital. It is reported that the Reds have 30,000 men defending Pyongyang. Another Red is added to the 75,000 captured so far. A vehicle burns beside the road. The attack is led by tanks as the 1st Cavalry advances under fire toward the center of the city. The railroad guides them. Then, surprisingly, the enemy fire weakens as U.S. infantrymen reach the heart of the city. The Reds are withdrawing. Although there is occasional rear guard fire and sniper activity, the main Red force has begun to flee northward in disorganization. A company medic gives first aid to a cavalryman wounded in the street fighting. As the 1st Cavalrymen overrun the city, South Korean troops join them. The ROK forces met heavy resistance on the east side of town, but finally fought their way through after 6 hours. They are following the retreating enemy northward. An estimated Red force of 30,000 is now fleeing Pyongyang. South Koreans and 1st Cavalrymen join forces, decide their zones of action, and move on. In the eastern area of Pyongyang, near the Taedong River, the South Koreans encounter a pocket of enemy rear guard troops and pause to wipe them out. Only small arms fire is necessary, as the river is crossed by bridge and assault boats. As UN forces take over the city, the North Korean Communist government has vanished, presumably having fled north across the Manchurian border. The heavily fortified capital of Korean communism is now under the United Nations flag. Shortly after the paratroopers take their positions, they are joined by tanks of the 1st Cavalry Division, which have pushed through from Pyongyang. As these forces join, the last remnants of the Red Army are compressed into an area only 50 miles from the Manchurian border. As UN forces take the North Korean capital at Pyongyang, a new threat to the Reds gets underway at Kimpo Airfield. Paratroopers of the 187th Airborne Regiment plan to jump ahead of the Reds fleeing Pyongyang, cutting off their escape route to the border. The planes are C-47 transports and C-119 boxcars. There are over 4,000 men in this operation, which consists of 2 separate drops on 20 and 21 October. The destination is a point 33 miles north of Pyongyang, where the Reds are fleeing through the towns of Sukchon and Suncheon. And here they go. The paratroopers bail out in waves from a dozen planes at a time. On the ground, there is practically no opposition. The attack comes as a complete surprise. Watching the jump is General MacArthur, who flew here from Japan to observe this first airborne operation of the Korean War. Flying over the attack area in his Constellation, the United Nations commander stated, "This closes the trap on the enemy." Of particular interest in this drop is the parachuting of heavy equipment, vehicles, and artillery. The equipment drop takes place 10 minutes after the personnel have landed. Most of the material lands without damage, and the paratroopers rush out to put it into action. Transportation found available on the scene is pressed into service. Although the big jump was delayed at the start by bad weather, it moves like clockwork once it gets underway. Casualties are few. Out of the 4,064 men who made the two jumps, only 90 men are listed as jump casualties, and most of these consist of broken legs and sprains. Evacuation is rapid. Specially equipped helicopters land to carry the wounded, and they are quickly on their way back to the hospitals. Shortly after the paratroopers take their positions, they are joined by tanks of the 1st Cavalry Division, which have pushed through from Pyongyang. As these forces join, the last remnants of the Red Army are compressed into an area only 50 miles from the Manchurian border. On 17 September at Busan Air Base, a transport plane arrives with the first big-name entertainer to visit the troops in Korea. Al Jolson, often billed as the world's greatest entertainer, is in the midst of his last road tour. A veteran of years in show business and months of entertaining troops in World War II, in Europe, Africa, India, and the South Pacific, Al Jolson disregarded his doctor's warning and at the age of 64 set out to entertain troops in hospitals and at the Korean battlefront. In front of the audience he liked best, Jolson gives one of his last performances. GI audience enjoys his act. Al entertained Korean War casualties in Japan before arriving in Korea, and already has used up much of the seemingly boundless energy which he put into every performance. It was impossible for Al Jolson not to give out with all his energy and all his heart. His gaiety and rhythm was infectious, and he knew it could bring joy to others. On 23 October, 6 days after he gave this performance, Al Jolson died from a heart attack in San Francisco. One of his last acts in Korea was to raise a United Nations flag. During the month covered by this combat bulletin, the United Nations drive into North Korea moved ahead with surprising rapidity. On 20 September, UN forces were fighting in the outskirts of Seoul, fanning south from the Incheon landing and breaking out of their old beachhead. By 5 October, Republic of Korea troops had crossed the 38th parallel and were 55 air miles beyond the imaginary border between North and South Korea. On the west, U.S. troops were meeting some resistance north of Seoul. United Nations forces, including U.S., British, and Australian troops, were regrouping in expectation of a full-scale drive across the parallel after the United Nations voted approval for General MacArthur to send his troops into North Korea. By 20 October, Communist forces were staggering, throwing off their uniforms and surrendering at the rate of 2,400 daily. The day before, Pyongyang, North Korean capital, had been captured by UN troops. 2 hours after Pyongyang was declared secure, members of the 187th Airborne Regiment dropped from planes 33 miles above Pyongyang and about 75 miles from the Manchurian border. South Korean troops drove westward to link up with the paratroopers. On the east coast, South Korean troops had taken Wonsan with unexpectedly light resistance and were advancing far to the north. Disintegrating communist troops were attempting to flee to the Manchurian border. There was still fighting ahead, but at this time it appeared that the Korean War was, as General MacArthur phrased it, definitely coming to an end.
The term "not for the weak or faint-hearted," that's inscripted on a sign right outside of Camp Rogers.
It's beneficial for all soldiers to attend and attempt to learn the Ranger Tab. The reason being is, one, it lets them become a better leader. Also, it teaches them the basics of infantry tasks and battle drills, which they will use in the future. And additionally, it will help save lives on the field because they can train those soldiers on those tasks, and if they have to, they can execute them flawlessly.
Any and all pre-Ranger courses, whether it be 1st Armored Division, 82nd, extremely beneficial for soldiers in those units, and not only helping them get to Ranger School, but give them a better idea of what are the things that they can expect and hopefully get them the training that they're really looking for to push themselves and be challenged for the future.
Pre-Ranger is an important thing to go to for soldiers because it's kind of like the Expert Infantryman's badge or the Expert Soldier's badge. You get a lot of time both getting out of your comfort zone, equipment you really don't want to wear, and practicing things you need to practice. You also get a lot of hands-on time with things you don't usually touch, like the saw, and then you get a lot of experience with small unit tactics.
On 10 February 2024, the class started with 42 candidates and concluded with the 23 soldiers seated here before you today. These 23 soldiers endured numerous physical and mental stressors. As a result of that, they leave here today knowing their physical and mental capabilities. Most importantly, they return to their organization as a better trained leader who can motivate their soldiers to complete the most difficult tasks.
On December 14, 2023, British Army Lieutenant General Andrew Harrison, Deputy Commander of the United Nations Command, passed the torch of leadership to Canadian Lieutenant General Derek McCulley in a change of command ceremony performed at the U.S. Forces Korea headquarters on Camp Humphreys, Republic of Korea. General Harrison's story is a long one, beginning back in the 1980s when he first commissioned as a second lieutenant in the British Army. After the ceremony, we were afforded an opportunity to sit down with General Harrison and hear his fascinating and incredible recollections from both decades past as well as his recent tenure as the Deputy Commander of the United Nations Command.
All right, well, thank you so much for meeting with us, General Harrison. From my understanding, you commissioned as a second lieutenant in March of 1987. And then on September 1st of 1989, you joined the Paros, right?
That's right, yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about those early days and what they were like?
Yeah, so I was at university, studying at university, and I had always known from the very days when I saw the Falklands War on television that I wanted to join the parachute regiment. So I worked pretty hard to try and get through that hurdle and achieved it eventually, and therefore, you know, one of the happiest days in my life when I passed the interesting selection for the parachute regiment and was commissioned into the regiment.
What is that training like? Is it similar to airborne nowadays, or was it a little bit different?
Yeah, it's very similar to what it is now. We have to, once you pass the commissioning course at the Royal Military Academy, which takes a year, um, part of that is selecting your sort of mental and leadership aptitude. But after you've completed that, then you're taken away, a group of you, to do a series of really sort of tough physical tests that lasts for weeks and weeks and weeks. That is called P Company. And P Company, once you pass that, you are given your red beret, and that enables you then to go on for parachute selection, parachute training afterwards. So for all of us in the parachute regiment, P Company is a big deal, and it's a tough old test.
When did you instruct at Sandhurst, and what was the teaching experience like?
Yeah, I went back to the academy to teach about 7 years after I'd left, and it was a fascinating time. I did a year instructing all 3 terms, so juniors, intermediates, and then the senior term at the academy. And then the college commander asked me if I would be his adjutant. So as a parachute regiment officer, I'm used to being in the field. I'm used to running around with a large pack on my back. But I wasn't used to riding a horse on a parade square and having to ride up steps and doing some of the famous things that the adjutant of Old College has to do. So it was it was unusual, very interesting, and actually is probably more nerve-wracking than many of the times I've been under fire.
At what point did you get involved with the UN, and how did you begin your time there?
Yeah, interesting. So I was working in main building in London, in the sort of the headquarters of defence, and I knew I was going on to staff college, and I knew I'd have another couple of years in driving a desk. And my friend was responsible for posting all of the interesting UN jobs around the world. So I went to see him, and I said, "Look, anything interesting coming up?" And he said, "Oh yeah, Sierra Leone's good, and something that looks interesting." And so I worked hard to get myself posted to United Nations in Sierra Leone, and sure enough, it was pretty interesting.
I would imagine. And I wanted to ask you about Sierra Leone. How did you land in the role of an unarmed military observer for the UN there?
Yeah, the war had just finished, so there was a war between the Revolutionary United Front, a rebel organization, and the government of Sierra Leone. So there was an accord, a peace accord that was signed between the rebels and the government. And my job as United Nations unarmed observer was to go in and sort out the modalities, the arrangements for de-armament, the decommissioning of weapons, and the reintegration of those rebels. And so I was working on that for a few months in one of the most challenging parts of the country, deep in the jungle in West Africa, working and living with the rebels when, unbeknownst to me, the civil war reignited, and I was caught up in the maelstrom that was that civil war.
So when the Civil War began, what were the immediate dangers to yourselves that you and the other observers recognized right away?
Well, we didn't know, because we were so deep in the jungle, and comms were so challenging, communications were so challenging. We didn't know it had reignited. So I went to one of the routine meetings that I had as the deputy team leader with the rebel chain of command, and I was totally unaware that this war had restarted and there was fighting going on in other parts of the country. So we went to that meeting, and it was during that meeting that we were kidnapped and subsequently held hostage. So it was a surprise and a shock to the system. And yeah,
So you guys found out in the worst possible way, but they kind of found out at the exact same time. Is that right?
yeah, they were ahead of us. They were ahead of us probably by about 12 hours. And so when we went to the meeting, I was there to negotiate about the peace accord, which we'd been doing routinely for a couple of months. But they invited us to meet that meeting with the specific intention of taking us hostage. and they came armed. They swarmed over us. They beat us up. They bound us, and they dragged us into the jungle, and that's how it all started.
How did you escape your capture from the RUF, and what were those 12 days like?
Yeah, they were awful. I mean, they were really difficult. It's difficult to envisage it at the time because you don't know what the outcome is going to be. But I was initially held in solitary confinement. Then a Russian friend of mine was put in the cell with me. People around us were being killed. We were treated pretty horrifically. The rebels held me as a UK officer responsible for all the ills of colonialization over hundreds of years. The Russian got very badly treated and beaten up because of the impact of the AK rifle and the hind gunships that the government had used against the rebels. And on 3 occasions we were taken off to be executed, and it was just a horrific time. We were very badly beaten. We were very badly treated. We had no food for 12 days. And Andre, the Russian, and myself and a Pakistani officer, Rafiq, took the opportunity to escape one night. And we climbed off the roof of a building where we were being kept captive. And we managed to escape, ran through the jungle, spent the night traversing the jungle. Even though 2 of us were injured, we managed to get into a compound of Indian soldiers that were armed but were surrounded by rebels. So we had to break into that compound through the rebel lines, which was pretty challenging, and alert the Indian soldiers without getting shot by, if you like, our own UN troops. But they were armed soldiers then. So once we were with them, we were armed, and at least we could defend ourselves. And we then had 3 months of being attacked by the rebels from the outside, but we held them off, and that's how it lasted for 3 months until a special forces operation that rescued us in a remarkable and very brave action that sadly cost the life of one of the operators.
In your escape, you weren't just unarmed, you had no equipment or navigational gear of any sort.
No.
How did you manage to get through the jungle and find this base?
I was reasonably familiar with the landscape because I'd been operating around that region, and I knew roughly where the Indian compound would be. I didn't know what state they would be in, and I didn't know whether they'd been overrun by the rebels. So as we worked through the night, it was super challenging and lots of uncertainty. But because of the way we had been treated and the atrocities that had been committed against people with us, any risk was worth it in comparison to being left where we were. So I'm happy that we made the right decision, but of course the outcome turned out to be good. So it's easy with hindsight.
You told me once you were in Calhoun, it sounds like you were involved in what essentially turned into a 10-week siege. What was your role in defending against the assault and the eventual extraction by the SAS?
Yeah, I mean, initially the place we were staying with the Indians was simply a cutting in the jungle that the Indians were defending. But as time went on, we started digging trenches, building communication trenches, cutting down the trees to build overhead protection. The sentries became more effective. We started building sort of Rambo-like traps in the jungle to stop the rebels attacking. And whilst people were wounded and were on the base, we were thank goodness never overrun. So and we were simply defending a small base that became stronger every day as the defenses improved.
How did the SAS get communications to you to let you know that they were coming?
Yeah. Well, obviously I can't confirm it was the SAS, but it was an operation to rescue us. And in a quite remarkable operation, they were the people who we would subsequently deal with. They started negotiating with the rebel group, and we were running out of food by this time, 8-10 weeks into it, so there was no rice left. And so the organization said that they would give the rebels a vehicle if the rebels would then drive that vehicle to where we were and give us the food that was in the vehicle. So that was the plan. But the rebels, acting irrationally or in a malevolent way, they drove the vehicle to the edge of our enclave so we could see it, and then proceeded to destroy all the food in front of us in the psychological games that were going on. We were starving, so we waited till 2 nights later, and then a small patrol of 4 Indian soldiers went to try and scavenge any food that they could in the middle of the night, and they brought back a small box which had my call sign on it, Oscar India 2, and in that call sign, the forces that were supporting us had smuggled a sat phone and a number of other bits and pieces, and so that sat phone was given to me, or the box was given to me the next morning, which then enabled me to communicate back to the Special Forces headquarters.
And it was a mix of operators, right? It was Nigerian forces and some others that came to
Yeah,
rescue.
yeah, there were a combination of multinational forces like any United Nations mission. Yeah.
How did that experience prepare you for your current role as a deputy commander of the United Nations Command?
I think that experience was the clearest example in my life where the unexpected happened. I had no idea that the Civil War was going to re-erupt. We were well trained in the context of UK forces, but we were operating independently. And I think from that moment on, I absolutely understood that things can go wrong very quickly, and the worst case scenario can happen. And that was what I learned, and I've always taken that as a lesson. My regimental motto is "Ready for anything," and actually, in the military, you have to be ready for anything and everything. And I think that lesson I learned in a hard way on that tour.
I can't even imagine what returning from an experience like that must have been like. But in 2002, you were appointed a member of the Order of the British Empire for your actions in Sierra Leone, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What does being a member of the order entail?
Well, I mean, it's a huge honor, and for me, it was a recognition of both the suffering and the pain and the worry that my family had been through, and it was testament to those brave men and women who were part of the operation to rescue me. So I was delighted for my family, most of all, but also for the other people who were involved in the operation, many of whom were recognized for gallantry in that operation.
Were you afforded an opportunity to meet the Queen when you were inducted?
I have had the opportunity to meet the Queen, and the Queen presented the medal to me at Buckingham Palace. So yeah, it was a very special moment for my wife, my children, and myself. Yeah,
That's amazing. Was it after all of that you completed your master's degree in defense administration?
Yep, it was very short, very short. From the sublime to the ridiculous. Yeah, I went from the jungles of Sierra Leone to the classrooms of Cranfield University to get my MBA. Yeah.
What goes into earning that degree?
It was a year of master's degree study looking at the higher level management of defense. Quite a lot of, I was an economist by background, so there's quite a lot of economics in it, a lot of marketing, advertising, and skills that I would find useful later in my life. So I thought it was thoroughly enjoyable.
It was then in 2003 when you gained command of a rifle company during the invasion of Iraq, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Was that your first command?
I'd commanded a platoon and a larger platoon before, but that was my first subunit command. So about 100 soldiers working under the MEF, under the U.S. Marine Corps, as we drove through. We drove north through. We started in Kuwait and worked through southern Iraq.
Tell me about the challenges and experiences in the time between taking up that command and then returning to Iraq in 2006 as the chief of staff for the 20th Armored Brigade.
Yeah, it was. I mean, the war fighting element that the invasion or the liberation of Iraq was full on war fighting, and working within an American MEF unit was a privilege and an honor, and actually I was grateful for the awesome firepower that my US friends brought to the fighting. So in many ways, it was the movement north. We didn't suffer much resistance, and the liberation of Basra happened quite quickly. And we were working the GOSPs in the oil fields around. So we had a number of company and battalion attacks, and actually, in comparison to what happened later, when the sort of the insurrection started and we started to get resistance from the Shia militias, that became much more dangerous. And tragically, I was involved in the incident where 6 military policemen were killed in Mujra Kabir, a small and very difficult and dangerous town in southern Iraq. So that was worse. And then when I went back, by the time I went back to Iraq, maybe a year or two later, for a 6-month tour as the brigade chief of staff, then that insurrection and the fighting by the insurgents was fully underway, and there was a lot of explosively formed projectiles, EFPs, that were raking through our vehicles and killing a number of our troops. So they were very difficult days in Iraq in the early days, and that was a seriously challenging tour. A lot of rocket attacks as well. So it is what we do, but it was difficult.
A year passes from then, and you find yourself in charge of organizing the repatriation of the bodies of British service members from Iraq and Afghanistan. How did you get into organizing that, and was it something that you actively pursued overseeing?
Yeah, no, it absolutely wasn't. When I was given the job to be in charge of the organization of army repatriations, it came as a complete surprise to me. And I didn't really understand why I'd been selected for that job and what the responsibilities were. It was all new. And I hadn't applied for that job. I subsequently found out I think it would be what you Americans would describe as a by name request for me to do that. And it was pretty harrowing. I mean, I had 119 bodies came back through in 69 different ceremonies over 14 months. And I was responsible for the liaison with the family, with the casualty visiting officer. I was responsible for the coordination of these often mass casualty events afterwards, all the last post ceremonies, all the dealings with the coroners, the inquests, all of that. And it was a very steep learning curve, hugely emotional. You know, every week it was meeting lovely families whose sons or daughters had been killed in the most tragic circumstances in the days before, and I was face to face with them a number of days and evenings each week. So it was very, very moving. It was a massive honor to be able to do that, and anyone and everyone would help me in order to make sure that we did the best for our fallen and their families. And it was an incredible year and a half, and I learned a lot. But sadly, I had lots of very harrowing conversations over that period.
I can't even imagine overseeing all of that. It sounds like it might have been even more challenging than being there.
In many ways, it was, and of course, there's nothing you can do to, apart from demonstrate the professionalism and the honor that we must bestow upon our fallen who made the ultimate sacrifice. That was the first time they were being brought home to their grieving families. It was always immensely charged, always immensely moving, and very difficult, but nothing in comparison to what those poor families had to go through.
After that, you were appointed to the command of the 2nd Battalion of the Parachute Regiment in 2009, correct?
That's right, yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, you had already been in Helmand in Afghanistan when you finished your 2007 tour.
Yeah, that's right. It's my second tour of Afghanistan.
What were you and your regiment doing in the Helmand province when you returned in 2010? And were you working with coalition forces at the time?
Yeah. So I was working in an area called Nari Siraj in the south. It had just been recaptured off the Taliban. There were, every day there was fighting going on there. We had 450 people deployed forward in my battle group, and over that 6 months, over 100 of those were wounded and 13 killed. So it was a very kinetic, very dangerous tour. We were being attacked, from IEDs that were a constant threat, constantly being initiated. We were, under direct and indirect fire routinely, and that amazing battle group, 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, and those attached to it fought with incredible valor under the most difficult and kinetic context one could imagine. And I saw bravery that was unimaginable during that tour, and it's just an unbelievable privilege to lead those young men and women.
So yes, I had heard that Helmand was one of the most volatile provinces in Afghanistan at the time, and you were wounded during your time there. Can you tell me about your personal experiences in Helmand?
Yeah. I mean, I was one of my soldiers had been killed. I went to the repatriation of him from Bastion Hospital to be flown back to the UK. Ironically, from the other end of the pipeline where I'd worked on repatriations beforehand, and I think he was maybe the 6th or 7th soldier I'd lost in those couple of months. And I was moving back from that repatriation back to my small patrol base PB2 in Nari Siraj when the electronic countermeasures of the lead vehicle went down. So we just simply swapped, and because I had ECM coverage, I took over the front vehicle. I had a set of thermal sights in my command vehicle, and I identified some people on the track in front of me, maybe 100 meters in front. We were moving almost silently in the depths of the night. I couldn't, and we wouldn't engage them because we hadn't identified them as insurgents at that stage, and they could have been Afghan National Security Forces. So I dismounted the vehicle and went forward at speed to identify who they were. And once they saw or heard me, they immediately turned and ran with their weapons. I followed them at speed, and behind me, my troops were following up, and we went into an area of compounds. And as I turned down an alleyway, there was a hail of fire came and met me, and we had a brief exchange of fire. And in that exchange of fire, I was hit in the chest. My body armor. I was running forward, and the plate was smashed into my stomach, and I assumed I'd been shot, and went down. I subsequently found out it was actually an RPG that had hit me from under 20 meters, and an RPG arms at 20 meters. So I was just super lucky that it was so close, because it hadn't fully armed, and therefore it just disintegrated as it hit my body armor and injured me in the face and the legs. But actually, the main charge didn't initiate, and that saved my life. And very bravely, my troops were rapidly upon me and dragged me out from under fire, and whisked me away to the hospital. So I was a lucky guy that day. Yeah.
When you jumped out, were your troops aware that you were going to get out of the vehicle?
I told my 50 cal operator over my right shoulder to cover me But what I didn't realize that I had thermal imaging on my site. He had an image intensifier, which wasn't as good. So he couldn't see the insurgents that I had clearly seen. So he didn't really understand what was going on. It was an error on my behalf, and and I've consistently been ribbed for leaving my protected mobility in order to launch some rather cavalier single-handed assault. Anyway, I when I was on the operating table, I learned the error of my ways. So.
Well, I heard your body armor has a place of honor.
Yeah, yeah. My body armor is a constant reminder every time I go to the loo, because it's in the toilet. I look at my body armor and think I'm a lucky lad.
So I want to skip ahead a bit here and ask about your time as the deputy commander of the United Nations Command here in the Republic of Korea. What is your time here in that position?
I mean, what an amazing place to work. Every day is different. There are constant frictions, constant tensions, provocations. There's always stuff happening, which is always dangerous and difficult. And again, there are a lot of ROC soldiers, a lot of UN soldiers, a lot of US soldiers, sailors and airmen and women who are out there every day keeping the Republic of Korea safe. And what a privilege to work with them.
What was it like holding the position of Colonel Commandant of the Paras at the same time?
Yeah, it was juggling two really important jobs, and I didn't see it at the time as a great thing to be able to do. But the difference was 12 hours of difference of time, so I could work during the day predominantly on UNC issues, and then at night I would be dealing quite often on issues relating to the parachute regiment. So they were both an honor for me to be able to do. So whilst it was hard work, I was very happy to do both.
Have you slept in the last 3 years?
Oh, don't worry. I will squeeze a few hours sleep in anywhere. I'm not shy of getting my head down.
Now that the colors have been passed, what are you feeling, and what will you go on to do now?
Well, I've been on the road for 9 years, working for predominantly coalitions around the world. Last 6 years with under American four-star leadership. So whilst all of those jobs have been really enjoyable, demanding, and challenging, I think I'm happy to go home. And after 9 years, to go back to gorgeous Carolyn and my three girls is I'm just very pleased to be going home for Christmas.
Tell me a little bit about the people that you got to work with while you were here. You work a lot with the Katusas and the junior enlisted, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we have Katusas in our team. I didn't really understand much about Katusas when I first arrived, but what a great bunch of very young men who bring an extra dimension to the headquarters, because we are not yet fully integrated with the ROC in the United Nations Command. I think that'll come in the near future. But actually, so the Katusas give us a very interesting cultural perspective that helps to educate us on things Korean, and therefore that relationship is great. And of course, there are 17 nations that are member states of the United Nations Command. So it is a fully multinational headquarters, and you're constantly working with Colombians or Kiwis or Aussies or Frenchmen. There's a real mix, and so there is this sort of cultural melange that makes life super interesting here in Humphreys.
Definitely. Earlier, I did a small deep dive on your Twitter account, and I found some old photos I was hoping you could reminisce about. Would you be up for that?
Of course.
All right. So the first one I've got here is, I believe, at the Seoul Defense Dialogue. What is the Seoul Defense Dialogue?
So the Seoul Defense Dialogue is a meeting that is organised up in Seoul, not surprisingly, where defence issues are considered, and we get keynote speakers to come and talk about those issues as a series of questions. And really, it's an opportunity to inform people about contemporary military and defence issues in front of the media and in front of interested parties, academic think tanks, etc. So it's really an opportunity to explore issues with an international audience.
The next one here is, I believe, a thank you dinner for the Cattusas. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Where was this at?
Yeah, that's at my house. So I was very lucky to have a decent sized dining room table, and I loved entertaining. I loved bringing rock generals, American generals, whoever around to my house. We would always have a laugh. We would always build very strong relationships. And that photo is a group of young Cattusas who I think found it quite awe-inspiring to sit around gossiping with a general, and we had a great time, and it was my way of thanking them for what they did.
Now, this is the UNCMAC Advisory Group and NNSC Workshop. I don't know what those acronyms are.
Okay, so UNCMAC is the UNC Military Armistice Commission. So they were responsible for the sort of detailed management and oversight of the armistice. And the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission, the NNSC, they effectively audit what we do and make sure that it is appropriate. So they're watching us, and if something is questionable or there's an investigation or something, it turns up in the media, looks inappropriate, then NNSC come in and do the investigation. So they need to understand how we operate. And so on that occasion, it was UNCMAC, the United Nations headquarters, and the NNSC really moving around the demilitarized zone, talking to one another about why things occurred, and cross briefing on UNC issues.
Essentially being observers for
Correct.
everything in the armistice.
Yeah,
That's very interesting. This last one, this is the Dutch ambassador to Korea. Is that right?
That is the Dutch ambassador. Yeah, it was. One of the countries that contributes troops and staff to the headquarters. I've always had a close relationship with Holland because I'm parachute regiment, and of course Market Garden, the Battle of Arnhem is a famous battle honour. So I got on particularly well with the Dutch ambassador. We had a great time, and this was at the East Coast Exchange, so another academic forum where we discussed issues predominantly relating to North Korea. She was a good friend.
General, I can't thank you enough for your time. Is there anything you want to add?
No, that was great. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for putting this on. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
And I learned there in Edinburgh a speech ascribed to a great military leader from history. And his speech goes, "From this day to the ending of the world, we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother." So to you, my band of brothers, from the 17 nations that have been prepared to shed blood, whether male or female, whatever specialization or service you come from, it's been my unmitigated honor to stand on your flank. Because of your efforts, your courage, your sense of duty, the line has held. And in perpetuity, it will hold.
Did you know that Army Emergency Relief can assist with basic startup furniture? Contact the AER office at 520-533-5312 for more information. Soldiers helping soldiers.
On 20 September, almost 3 months after the North Korean communists launched their invasion, United Nations troops are in the first stages of their all-out drive toward North Korea. 5 days previously, they went from the defensive to the offensive, when U.S. Marines made an amphibious landing 150 miles behind the enemy lines at Incheon. The landing cut off the enemy from his supplies and caught him in a giant United Nations pincers. Air Force, Navy, and Marine planes give support to ground troops and cut off communist attempts to bring up reinforcements from the north and south. Exactly 3 months to the day after the city of Seoul fell to the communist invaders, UN forces recapture this South Korean capital. These are Marines and U.S. 7th Division troops advancing into Seoul under enemy fire. Street fighting rages throughout the city. The Reds have fortified many of the buildings, and red tanks may appear around any corner. It had been hoped that Seoul might be recaptured with a minimum of destruction. But this is impossible, as the Reds stage a house-to-house fight. After a 5-day battle for Seoul, General MacArthur announces the city's recapture on 26 September. There is still fighting in the city, but the main communist garrison is now fleeing to the north. UN troops rest as they close another chapter of history. At the Ashiya Air Base in Japan during the battle for Seoul, the 187th Airborne Regiment arrives from the United States. Ammunition and other supplies are loaded on unit vehicles which will be flown to Korea. The paratroopers, 2,400 strong, board C-54 transports and C-119 flying boxcars for their flight to the combat zone. Kimpo Airfield is the destination. The paratroopers are rushed to staging areas as fast as they unload. The same C-54s fly wounded back to Japan. In its first 4 days of operation, the Kimpo airlift evacuated 313 wounded to Japan. Cargo and passenger planes are coming into Kimpo at a rate of 1 every 10 minutes. Typical cargo is this disassembled 280-ton bridge. These ponton boats are part of the bridge, which was shipped entirely by air. The airfield is inspected by Air Force leaders past and present. In the group are General George C. Kenney, Commanding General, Air University, Lieutenant General George C. Stratemeyer, commanding General U.S. Far East Air Forces, and General Carl Spaatz, retired, former commander of the U.S. Air Force. In the background is a captured Yak fighter plane found in good condition. Now land-based at Kimpo are Marine carrier planes aiding in the tactical support of ground forces north of Seoul. This F-7F Tiger Cat night fighter proves especially valuable during this stage of the fighting north of Seoul. F-7Fs are equipped with radar and are very effective against convoys and troop concentrations at night and in bad weather. These Tiger Cats and Corsairs are being loaded with 5-inch rockets for a strike near Seoul. As UN troops liberate South Korean territory, they find more and more appalling evidence of mass atrocities committed by the Reds. On 6 October, it is estimated that 25,000 South Korean men, women, and children, as well as United States soldiers taken prisoner, have been massacred by the retreating Reds. Bodies are found in many different areas, many having been killed by clubbing and burning, as well as by shooting. One of the largest mass graves is found at Daejeon, where 6,000 atrocity victims are uncovered. When the fighting ends in Korea, these scenes will be evidence for a war crimes investigation. October 17 is a suspenseful day for the U.S. 1st Cavalrymen as they advance into the outskirts of Pyongyang, capital city of North Korea. The city is known to be heavily fortified, and it is expected that the Reds will make a death stand for their capital. It is reported that the Reds have 30,000 men defending Pyongyang. A tropical typhoon hits the U.S. Sakai Army base in Japan. With rain and wind ranging up to 110 miles per hour, it is the worst storm to hit Japan in 16 years. Corrugated metal roofing flies through the air like paper. Most of the tile, shingle, and corrugated metal roofs are damaged. The concrete structures withstand the storm well, although windows are broken and there is water damage. There are no military casualties from the storm since most of the troops remain indoors in the stronger buildings, safe from the falling trees and power lines. But among the Japanese in the storm's path, 135 are killed, over 1,000 injured, and over 200,000 made homeless. The heaviest military damage is suffered by wooden and tar paper buildings. These tropical storms are expected near the Sea of Japan at this time of the year. October 17 is a suspenseful day for the U.S. 1st Cavalrymen as they advance into the outskirts of Pyongyang, capital city of North Korea. The city is known to be heavily fortified, and it is expected that the Reds will make a death stand for their capital. It is reported that the Reds have 30,000 men defending Pyongyang. Another Red is added to the 75,000 captured so far. A vehicle burns beside the road. Ammunition explodes in the fire. The attack is led by tanks as the 1st Cavalry advances under fire toward the center of the city. The railroad guides them. Then, surprisingly, the enemy fire weakens as U.S. infantrymen reach the heart of the city. The Reds are withdrawing. Although there is occasional rear guard fire and sniper activity, the main Red force has begun to flee northward in disorganization. A company medic gives first aid to a cavalryman wounded in the street fighting. As the 1st Cavalrymen overrun the city, South Korean troops join them. The ROK forces met heavy resistance on the east side of town, but finally fought their way through after 6 hours. They are following the retreating enemy northward. An estimated Red force of 30,000 is now fleeing Pyongyang. South Koreans and 1st Cavalrymen join forces, decide their zones of action, and move on. In the eastern area of Pyongyang, near the Taedong River, the South Koreans encounter a pocket of enemy rear guard troops and pause to wipe them out. Only small arms fire is necessary, as the river is crossed by bridge and assault boats. As UN forces take over the city, the North Korean Communist government has vanished, presumably having fled north across the Manchurian border. The heavily fortified capital of Korean communism is now under the United Nations flag. Shortly after the paratroopers take their positions, they are joined by tanks of the 1st Cavalry Division, which have pushed through from Pyongyang. As these forces join, the last remnants of the Red Army are compressed into an area only 50 miles from the Manchurian border. As UN forces take the North Korean capital at Pyongyang, a new threat to the Reds gets underway at Kimpo Airfield. Paratroopers of the 187th Airborne Regiment plan to jump ahead of the Reds fleeing Pyongyang, cutting off their escape route to the border. The planes are C-47 transports and C-119 boxcars. There are over 4,000 men in this operation, which consists of 2 separate drops on 20 and 21 October. The destination is a point 33 miles north of Pyongyang, where the Reds are fleeing through the towns of Sukchon and Suncheon. And here they go. The paratroopers bail out in waves from a dozen planes at a time. On the ground, there is practically no opposition. The attack comes as a complete surprise. Watching the jump is General MacArthur, who flew here from Japan to observe this first airborne operation of the Korean War. Flying over the attack area in his Constellation, the United Nations commander stated, "This closes the trap on the enemy." Of particular interest in this drop is the parachuting of heavy equipment, vehicles, and artillery. The equipment drop takes place 10 minutes after the personnel have landed. Most of the material lands without damage, and the paratroopers rush out to put it into action. Transportation found available on the scene is pressed into service. Although the big jump was delayed at the start by bad weather, it moves like clockwork once it gets underway. Casualties are few. Out of the 4,064 men who made the two jumps, only 90 men are listed as jump casualties, and most of these consist of broken legs and sprains. Evacuation is rapid. Specially equipped helicopters land to carry the wounded, and they are quickly on their way back to the hospitals. Shortly after the paratroopers take their positions, they are joined by tanks of the 1st Cavalry Division, which have pushed through from Pyongyang. As these forces join, the last remnants of the Red Army are compressed into an area only 50 miles from the Manchurian border. On 17 September at Busan Air Base, a transport plane arrives with the first big-name entertainer to visit the troops in Korea. Al Jolson, often billed as the world's greatest entertainer, is in the midst of his last road tour. A veteran of years in show business and months of entertaining troops in World War II, in Europe, Africa, India, and the South Pacific, Al Jolson disregarded his doctor's warning and at the age of 64 set out to entertain troops in hospitals and at the Korean battlefront. In front of the audience he liked best, Jolson gives one of his last performances. GI audience enjoys his act. Al entertained Korean War casualties in Japan before arriving in Korea, and already has used up much of the seemingly boundless energy which he put into every performance. It was impossible for Al Jolson not to give out with all his energy and all his heart. His gaiety and rhythm was infectious, and he knew it could bring joy to others. On 23 October, 6 days after he gave this performance, Al Jolson died from a heart attack in San Francisco. One of his last acts in Korea was to raise a United Nations flag. During the month covered by this combat bulletin, the United Nations drive into North Korea moved ahead with surprising rapidity. On 20 September, UN forces were fighting in the outskirts of Seoul, fanning south from the Incheon landing and breaking out of their old beachhead. By 5 October, Republic of Korea troops had crossed the 38th parallel and were 55 air miles beyond the imaginary border between North and South Korea. On the west, U.S. troops were meeting some resistance north of Seoul. United Nations forces, including U.S., British, and Australian troops, were regrouping in expectation of a full-scale drive across the parallel after the United Nations voted approval for General MacArthur to send his troops into North Korea. By 20 October, communist forces were staggering, throwing off their uniforms and surrendering at the rate of 2,400 daily. The day before, Pyongyang, North Korean capital, had been captured by UN troops. 2 hours after Pyongyang was declared secure, members of the 187th Airborne Regiment dropped from planes 33 miles above Pyongyang and about 75 miles from the Manchurian border. South Korean troops drove westward to link up with the paratroopers. On the East Coast, South Korean troops had taken Wonsan with unexpectedly light resistance and were advancing far to the north. Disintegrating communist troops were attempting to flee to the Manchurian border. There was still fighting ahead, but at this time it appeared that the Korean War was, as General MacArthur phrased it, definitely coming to an end.
Did you know that AER can help with some costs of homeschooling for your children K through 12? Contact the AER office at 533-5312 for more information. Soldiers helping soldiers.
I am Chief Warrant Officer 2, Latoya Jennings, and today I am honoring Sergeant First Class Alan C. Cash, who joined the U.S. Army as a supply specialist. In 1993, he became an infantryman. Cash deployed in support of the Gulf War in 1991, participated in the 2003 invasion of Iraq, and then deployed in 2005 in support of Operation Iraq Freedom, where he distinguished himself beyond the call of duty while engaging with the enemy on October 17, 2005. Cash was conducting a nighttime patrol when the vehicle he was in charge of was attacked by enemy small arms fire. An explosive device disabled the vehicle, causing it to become engulfed in flames. After exiting the vehicle, Cash began to extract the trapped driver from the vehicle. After opening the hatch, Cash and a fellow soldier pulled the driver out and extinguished the flames. While moving the body to a safe position, Cash's fuel-soaked uniform ignited, causing severe burns to his body, but he continued toward the rear of the vehicle to help other soldiers who were trapped in the troop compartment. At this time, the enemy noted Cash's movements and began to direct fire on his position. When another element of the company engaged the enemy, Cash seized the opportunity by moving into the open troop door and aiding 4 of his soldiers to escape from the burned vehicle. Afterwards, he noticed 2 other soldiers had not been accounted for and re-entered the burning vehicle to retreat. Despite the severe 2nd and 3rd degree burns covering the majority of his body, Cash persevered through the pain to encourage his fellow soldiers and ensure they received needed medical care. When the medical evacuation helicopters arrived, he selflessly refused to board until all the other wounded soldiers were evacuated first. Cash died from wounds sustained in this action on November 8, 2005 at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas. His heroic actions at the cost of his life saved the lives of his teammates. Sergeant First Class Alan C. Cash, you are my hero.
This is what you should expect. The professionalism, the execution, and the delivery of excellence. You transform your company. You drive excellence in your battalion. So these are the people that we care about the most. To the left and right of you. These are your tank crews. These are your brothers. If you're a young leader that wants to be a non-commissioned officer, this is what we expect from you. To deliver this lethality.
We want to leave a legacy behind for each other. You know, for me in particular, it's a legacy of my own to leave it behind, to show my family members, you know, that in my field of work, I'm the best at what I do.
It feels awesome to represent Axman Company as well as 137 Armor. And, you know, we've been doing lots of training since we got here. Nobody wants to lose, everybody wants to win, and all the crews out here are extremely proficient and well performing. Cut them down, strike hard.
Wednesday, February 14th through Sunday, February 18th, 2024, the 2nd Armored Brigade Combat Team, 1st Armored Division, gathered its best tank and Bradley crews at the Grafenwohr Training Area, Germany, to compete in the Strike Cup competition. The competition spanned over multiple disciplines, including a PT event, combat casualty care, range termination, and gunnery tables. The 5-day event challenged crews from across the brigade to test their mettle and earn the titles of Best Bradley and Tank Crew, respectively. The winning crews moved forward to compete in the 1st Armored Division's Iron Cup competition and following the Sullivan Cup competition.
Line 8, 1 Alpha.
As the 2nd Armored Brigade Combat Team begins to conclude its forward deployment to the European theater, its commitment to training is still paramount.
Every gunnery I've been at, I've learned something, taught something, I've shot better progressively through the 3 that I've done. This is kind of the ultimate culmination of everything.
Other soldiers just try to compete because it shows you that you're a professional at your job. What motivates me is my last name, Hammer.
Conquer or die. Strike hard. Courageous and faithful. Strike hard.
Our squadron is today conducting what's known as a Combined Arms Live Fire Exercise, or CALFEX. That is where we take all of the training we have done in our time here in Poland and put it all together at the troop level, integrating tank platoon, scout platoons, indirect fire through artillery, mortars, aviation support, UAS. And we put them all together so that we can apply that at the time and place of our choosing on a battlefield to defeat an enemy.
Enemy contact in my sector of fire. How about you? Roger, negative. Enemy contact in 1, 2, or 3. Over. Your location now. Back up.
Pete Seibert Jr., P-E-T-E-S-E-I-B-E-R-T, J.R.
What's your title, sir? If you have what are you doing out here today?
Oh, out here, I'm a descendant. I'm my dad, Pete Seibert, was in the 10th and climbed Riva Ridge, so that's why I'm out here tonight.
Why do you think it's important to do these kinds of things? You know, the Riva Ridge, all that stuff happened 80 years ago. Why do you think it's important today that we still do things like this to celebrate life?
I think it's incredibly important because this is the start of American skiing. I mean, they were skiing before it, obviously, because that's why my dad got in the 10th. He was a skier from New Hampshire. But this really is about a lot of different things. It's about his legacy, the legacy of all those people that he served in the 10th with. Their skiing, what they brought to us. They gave us more than, I mean, it's not more, but you know, they gave us our freedom, and then they gave us a way of life. And skiing is a way of life that I've enjoyed, that my kids enjoy, that I can't wait to have grandkids enjoy. And they need to know about all of this, you know, and so that's why it's so important.
How do you think your father would feel about this kind of, celebrating the legacy of the 10th?
He loved skiing, and he loved his comrades in arms from the 10th. The guys that then went on into the ski business, you know, at different places, and all the camaraderie that went on there. And to have it celebrated like this, I think he'd be really honored, you know, and he'd want this to be passed along because, you know, nowadays there's a lot of talk about skiing as an industry, and yes, it has become a business, but it's really a way of life and a tradition and something that, you know, it creates a bond that's international now. You know, I mean, it's amazing to see how the guys from the 10th went over to Germany and to Italy, and met with and skied with the guys that they fought against. You know, it's a way to heal all that also.
If you could tell some of the current 10th Mountain soldiers anything, any advice, anything to do with skiing, what would you want to tell them?
Well,
but if you were to talk to all the four jobbers in the 10th Mountain, what would you want to tell them?
I think it's incredible what you guys do now with the equipment that you have. I think it's great. You know, we have a veterans program that comes to. We have vets that were wounded that come and learn to mono ski and that sort of thing. And one night, when the first night they showed up, I was giving my dad's book out, and there was a big, tall guy that stepped up. He was one-legged, and I had to explain to everybody. Every time I gave somebody a book, I had to explain why I was there, what I was doing, so on. And when I said 10th Mountain Division, this guy, he was wounded in Afghanistan, and he reached across and grabbed my hand, would not let it go, and said he would not be where he was standing that night if it weren't for the 10th Mountain Division. And that's something that's more recent history that you guys are doing that you should be so proud of.
This is the flag of the United States Army, an emblem new to the service, but old for the many pages of history it represents. From its standard fly the streamers recalling many of the nation's gravest hours, times of suffering and triumph, of sacrifice and valor. Woven in the texture of this flag is the battle history of the Army. It is testament and monument to the courageous spirit of America. Stone cannot encompass spirit, nor can memory truly be frozen in the shrines that men erect. But in granite and marble, in fieldstone and clay, we find the symbols of our desire to preserve what is enduringly valuable in our lives and in our honored history. The American soldier is so honored and has always been.
Right, shoulder. Pull. Pull. Right. Good.
In this tomb of the unknown, on a green slope in Arlington Cemetery, the bodies of three heroes lie buried. The unknown soldier of World War I and the recently interred unidentified heroes of World War II and Korea. Symbols of all heroes who fell in the wars of the nation's maturity. In village squares and public grounds, their memory and the memory of all their brothers in arms before them are enshrined in a chain of tribute that reaches back across the developing story of the nation itself. Its recognition of its manifest destiny to be strong enough to support freedom beyond its own shores. The wild opening of its western territories. The tragic strife of the Civil War, which tested its ability to stand as a union. The painful years of its early growth, back to the beginning, to the men who began building that history, the nation's history, and with it the history of the Army, which has fought to preserve the nation's integrity and indeed its very life. These were the first, these embattled farmers, as the poet Emerson called them, the Minutemen, who stood at Concord Bridge and fired the shot heard round the world. Here Later, in a fury of rebellion, the American Army was born, brought to life by angry militiamen who turned back a British raid on the supply stores in Massachusetts colony and drove the red-coated troops of the King in a rout back to Boston. They began their great adventure as a group of individuals, united at first only by something intangible in the already emerging American spirit, a sense of the importance of independence. They came down from their farms and out of their shops to take up arms with the idea only of standing up for their rights against a domination which had become more oppressive with the years. Fate gave them a leader, and under him they built a unity in arms, a fighting force in which they could wage their growing rebellion with a hope of victory. The Continental Congress gave their struggle a direction that was breathtaking in its audacity and sweeping in its vision of man's rights. And now the soldier of the revolution was fighting for more than a vaguely felt idea. He was fighting for the creation of a new and free nation, under handicaps only dimly understood by the 20th century American mind. But to the glory of his own wondrous age and the survival of freedom for all the ages that would do him honor, he endured. Through black defeats and incredible hardships, he endured, and went on to shape the victories at Trenton and Saratoga, and finally the splendid triumph of Yorktown, where the dream of liberty at last took life. Because of his own beliefs, simple and clean in the rightness of his cause, the American Army held together in its infancy. And for the first time in the history of the New World, the quality of patriotism became part of a soldier's creed. The young nation which the soldier had won with his blood flourished. A bedrock of quality gave it a base on which its hard-bought freedom for its people could grow. The acquisition of vast new lands gave it the opportunity to expand physically. But before the country was 30 years old, war came again. The conflict with the British this time was over British interference with the rights of American seamen. The Army's most illustrious victory was won at New Orleans, when it drove the invading British back into the sea. Although this War of 1812 was primarily a naval one, the country learned its need for a professional standing army. Posterity inherited a national anthem when a young American named Francis Scott Key was moved to make his tribute to the unconquerable Star-Spangled Banner, when after the British shelling of Fort McHenry, he saw the flag still flying. When Texas became a part of the United States after its independence, trouble between the United States and Mexico began to broil, and finally erupted into war. The Lone Star State of Texas prepared the preface to the next chapter in America's history. A Mexican possession, Texas won its independence after a long and bloody struggle during which a band of 187 Americans met death and heroic fame in their brave but doomed defense of the Alamo. When Texas became a part of the United States after its independence, trouble between the United States and Mexico began to broil and finally erupted into war. With the acquisition of new territories, which the soldier won in the war with Mexico, the nation was growing in strength and productivity. But with development had come also internal tensions in the young citadel of self-government. Tensions which finally exploded and brought down in ruins the dream of peaceful union. The most tragic of all wars, that of brother against brother, was forced upon the nation. The Confederate soldier had behind him the unified effort of a culture that was actually a way of life. He had as well a superb military organization backing him. But more than these, he had the hot and defiant pride of the rebel, with the rebel's formidable confidence that his will shall prevail. A Confederate poet wrote, "The world shall behold in many a distant port another flag unfurled." And from the rapidity with which the Southerner began chalking up victories, it looked as if it might happen. He fought with a magnificence that did him high credit. And in the end, it was not so much his spirit as the resources of his army that failed him. In performance, the Union Army suffered at first from an overconfidence and a lack of unity. But in the crucible of combat, these were corrected. By mid-war, the Union soldier emerged as one of the most effective fighters in the history of warfare. The Civil War has many distinctions in the annals of arms. It was the first modern war. It was a war of sweeping movement. It was a war of mass fire. Spectacular plans were brilliantly executed. Its campaigns are still studied as classics of combat. But more than these, no war that America ever fought cut so deeply into the nation's heart. World War I saw more than 2 million Americans in arms. The doughboy went into the war that gave him his first experience with Europe's geography, cocky and idealistic. He sang as he marched through the dust of the ruined French villages, and the weary and bleeding continent took new hope from his confidence. With the guns of the Civil War stilled, the nation could turn its attention once more to the great challenge of its physical expansion, the settling of the lands that lay beyond the Mississippi. Pioneer America was on the move. But the challenge brought its own enemy. The Indian, who had resisted the white man's settlement of the new continent from the beginning, had grown bold and powerful in the years the country was absorbed in its struggle for the Union. Now he was able to show in fierce strength his opposition to this extension into the buffalo hunting grounds. To the soldier fell the harsh task of bringing safety to the Great West. 300,000 Indians roamed the plains, The Army at its peak numbered scarcely more than 2,500. From the Rio Grande to Canada, from the Mississippi to the Pacific, the soldier was the arm of the national authority. Against nation after nation of Indian tribes, he fought to make it secure, a brother to danger, enduring the grim life of the frontier, dying his lonely death on a stretch of parched prairie beyond the sight, and even at times beyond the interest of the civilization he served. He did more than his duty, one general officer wrote in tribute to this soldier of the West. He did more than his duty, and in the doing he wrote a page of glory which will be read and thrilled to so long as men prize courage. Finally, at the end of the flaming 19th century, the West was secure. From sea to sea, the American nation now stretched, strong and free and vital. The land yielded steadily to the peaceful tools of production. But fires were burning beyond the national borders, which would sear into history's new page the next mission for the U.S. soldier. That mission took him away from his own land in the summer of 1898, across the water to Cuba, which was fighting for its independence from Spanish domination. The Spanish-American War was a short one. The soldier handled himself well. The world remembers the soldier of that war chiefly for his most significant and decisive battle, his dashing charge up San Juan Hill and nearby El Caney on the approach to Santiago on the first day of July. Victory in this war brought the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam, as well as Cuba, into U.S. possession. And the United States would forever after be involved in the affairs of the world at large. The next involvement for the soldier was in his own hemisphere, a punitive expedition into Mexico in 1916, in pursuit of Pancho Villa, the Mexican bandit who had destroyed American life and property on the border. In the perspective of history, it was a minor campaign, but it was important to American self-interest and self-respect, and it prepared the Army for the most challenging test it had ever had. World War I saw more than 2 million Americans in arms. The doughboy went into the war that gave him his first experience with Europe's geography, cocky and idealistic. He sang as he marched through the dust of the ruined French villages, and the weary and bleeding continent took new hope from his confidence. Battle dimmed his exuberance, for men mature quickly under fire. But the spirit and the effectiveness with which he fought earned for him a high place in the respect of all the nations of the earth. A British poet wrote in his tribute, "You traveled across a watching world to show how heroes die." Steadily he progressed through the Holocaust of Cantigny, Chateau Thierry, Belleau Wood, the Marne, the flaming horror of the Argonne Forest. He turned the tide of battle. And the Great War came to an end. Now the world was truly ready for peace. Certainly the veteran of that war hoped he had brought about a world that would be free of war forever after. The hope for peace, however, was soon to be doomed by events taking place in other parts of the world.
Hat sich über der Bewegung ein schwarzer Schatten erhoben. Die SA hat so wenig als irgendeine andere Institution der Partei, die es wagen, sich an ihr zu versündigen.
With Nazi Germany's march on Poland in 1939, the threat of conflict burst into shattering reality. War of a dimension the world had never seen was introduced. Before it was ever involved, America began preparing its men. The long conversion from citizen to serviceman began. Sometimes it seemed like a hopeless task. But almost before they knew it, America's sons were soldiers. Their training for war, however, began under conditions something less than realistic. It was still possible to believe that America could remain untouched, and war still seemed remote. Then came Pearl Harbor, and now America was committed, with its every resource, to seeing the grim war to its bitter end. And its job would be the soldier's job. Some of the sad and heart-twisting qualities of war never change. And some change enormously. World War II had almost the entire globe as its battlefield. It brought new dimensions to the experience of combat. The soldier fought everywhere, and he went into battle every way he could get there. Through the air, over the seas, he hit 100 beaches, large and small, in the vast world of the Pacific. He fought his way through jungle hells whose names the world had never heard before. And on the other side of the globe, he inched his perilous way through the bleeding fields of Europe. He fought in villages where his fathers had fought before him, in towns grown old in peace, in cities which for centuries had stored the flower of man's Western culture. Destruction lay in the wake of every victory won. The blood of heroes colored every mile of ground. Biting weariness and aching loneliness lay behind every statistic of success. But through city after city, the victorious soldier pushed on, and the jubilation of the people was his reward. On the other side of every liberated city lay the war again. Another battle to win. Another mile or another 20 to travel. Another day to fight. Through 3.5 years of Holocaust, the soldier moved in an agonizing but relentless march, pushing back the encroachments of aggression until the enemy finally lay crushed and defeated. How jubilant was the taste of victory. How sweet the rewards of peace. A bruised and suffering world stirred again to the triumphant strains of victory. For the soldier, it was the proud end of a long and arduous road. From all the remote places where he had traveled, from all the scattered battlefields, he returned home again to find a soldier's welcome. He returned to the life he had left as citizen soldiers for generations before him had done. And because the world he had preserved seemed at last so ready for peace, he turned his pursuits to peaceful things. But despite man's bright hope, aggression had not yet been eliminated from the world. The fragile peace was suddenly shattered. The communist-led North Korean army plunged across the line which separated it from free South Korea. And now, once again, the soldier was on foreign soil, making his soldier's way through the kind of troubles which had always beset his brothers. Fighting the soldier's fight, the kind of fight on which victory in every war behind him had depended. Korea added new names to the honor roll of heroes. It added new listings to the roster of once unfamiliar places, which would forever after be part of the nation's history. Taishan, Seoul, Old Baldy, Fort Chop Hill. And it added another page of valor to the soldier's record. And like all wars, the cost was high. For bravery is not cheap, nor are any of the qualities which give a man what it takes to stand and fight. What are the beliefs for which men will fight? They range from faith in a nation which strives under God to achieve its destiny, from a capacity for honor that springs perhaps from something fundamental in man's spirit, from these all across the broad range of human experience. Through 8 generations and a dozen wars, the individual American within reach of the enemy's cannon has searched for his personal identity with the massive forces of history which have made him and his rifle the agents of the national interest. And because he has in his own way, in his own time, found his answer, his nation has found in every succeeding test a victor's strength and a shield for peace in the modern army of today. He has fought well, this soldier of America's heritage. He won a nation, built it, and defended it against every threat to destroy it. And his most enduring monument is that nation itself.
The AER program has continued helping soldiers and their families for the past 82 years. AER is a nonprofit organization that extends no-interest loans and grants to our active duty soldiers, families, and retirees. AER extends assistance with POV repairs, mortgage, rent, utilities, PCS moves, repair of HVACs, emergency travel, and more. AER has a scholarship program for spouses and dependent children. Spouses can apply online throughout the year, and dependent children must apply 1 February through 1 April. Visit the AER website at www.armyemergencyrelief.org. And finally, the annual AER campaign is 1 March through 15 May. Your donations in any amount is greatly appreciated. Soldiers helping soldiers. See your AER unit coordinator to donate. For more information, call 520-533-5312.
The winner of this quarter's Daisy Award is Ms. Kaylee Combs. For me, it's a passion. And I think most of our Army nurses, that once you're an Army nurse, you are always an Army nurse. You will always be an Army nurse. And the reason that nurses do what they do, for the most part, is because they care. You can't get away from that. Even here at Bassett, it's in your motto, above all we care, right? And I wanted to say thank you again for all that you do to support Army nurses and to continue to encourage them on a daily basis as they work to care for everyone that you hold dear and that are important. So, I'm really excited.
I'm Patrick Goodman. I've been with the Netcom DSD, Network Operations Analysis Division, for about 6 years here at Netcom HQ. My job is awesome because of all of the different opportunities and the challenges that I can overcome with my teammates. At Netcom, we support the defensive operations, we have tactical operations, we have all these different kind of operations within the cyber space. And to me, it's just super interesting.
Did you know that AER can help you with dental emergencies? Contact the AER office at 533-5312 for more information. Soldiers helping soldiers.
Being a 46th year at the Old Guard is definitely a unique opportunity because you get to work with an amazing variety of soldiers that all have a unique role, and it's what makes them the face of the Army. Being a 46th year is all about just being able to tell a story, whether that's through photo, video, or a different medium. And that's honestly what we're doing, is just trying to provide the public and soldiers with documentation of all the different things that we're doing. I chose this MOS because I've always had an interest in photography and video, and I was thrilled when I found out I had the opportunity to help tell the Army story.
Being a 46th Victor at the Old Guard, I think it's very exciting for me. Choosing to be a comm-cam was the best opportunity for me as a creative person. I get to be able to use my skills and enhance them on a day-to-day basis. When I first start out a project, I start to think of a theme. I have to think whether it's going to be fast-paced, if it's going to be serious, informative, and once I figured out the theme, it helps me write out the shot list. It helps me figure out who I need, and it helps me plan out my editing before I actually get to post. Being a 46th Victor at the Old Guard keeps things very interesting, and I really appreciate it.
In the narrow corridor across the northern portion of South Vietnam, you will find some of the finest fighting men who have ever worn the uniform of the United States Army. Their job is tough, but they are tougher still. Whether afloat on wheels and treads, or afoot, they do what they have to do, and nothing stops them. With all their supporting units, the men of this division come from a special task force designed to secure the land and defeat the enemy no matter where he may be. Theirs is a proud history of jungle warfare victory under the sign of the Southern Cross. This is the inspiring saga of the Americal Division. World War II in the Pacific. They called it Task Force 6814. 25,000 American troops from Massachusetts, Illinois, and North Dakota. On March 12, 1942, they landed at Noumea, New Caledonia. Their mission was to help the French defend the island against invasion by the Japanese. Within 2 months after their arrival in New Caledonia, the task force was activated as a full U.S. Army division under the command of Major General Alexander M. Patch. It was the first time a U.S. Army division was ever activated on foreign soil. Instead of a numerical designation, the division became known as the Americal Division, a combination of the words America and Caledonia. In October 1942, the division began a 2-year odyssey to find and fix the Imperial Japanese Army forces in the South Pacific. Troops of the 164th Infantry Regiment landed on Guadalcanal and became the first American Army unit to conduct offensive operations against the enemy in any theater of war. These Americal troops spent 5 months participating in the battles to hold Guadalcanal. The men of the 182nd Infantry Regiment fought in the green hell of Bougainville from Christmas Day, 1943, to December, 1944. They crushed elements of the Japanese Army's 6th Division in a bloody struggle for Hill 260. Staff Sergeant Jesse Drowley received the Medal of Honor for his exceptional bravery on Bougainville. Throughout the spring and summer of 1945, the Americal Division swept through the Philippines, landing at Leyte, Cebu, Negros, and Mindanao. At the end of the Philippines campaign, they spent time as occupation forces in the Japanese homeland. In December 1945, the division was sent home and deactivated. (1967) Vietnam. 22 years after the close of World War II, history begins to repeat itself. It's a different war in a different land, and once again there's a special need for an Army task force designed to secure the land and defeat the enemy in a given area. To meet this need, the U.S. Military Assistance Command organizes Task Force Oregon, which, as it turned out later, was to become the new Americal Division. Assigned to the task force are 2 light infantry brigades, 1 brigade of regular infantry, 1 airborne brigade, and 1 brigade of air mobile cavalry. The Republic of Vietnam, for military purposes, is divided into 4 parts called corps areas. The first corps is the area immediately below the demilitarized zone which separates North and South Vietnam. Known as I Corps, this area is one of the worst troubled spots of the war. Originally, the United States Marines kept the lid on in this group of provinces. But in late 1966, the demilitarized zone became such a hotbed of enemy activity, the Marines were obliged to concentrate their forces in the area between Da Nang and the DMZ. This left the entire southern portion of the I Corps area without an adequate fighting force to control the communist enemy there. The commander of the U.S. Military Assistance Command, concerned for the security of Highway 1, a vital supply route running through the Corps area, and for the dwindling economy of the region, selected the peninsula at Chulai as headquarters for a special task force of U.S. Army units. The highlands overlooking the corridor served as a stronghold for the 2nd North Vietnamese Army Forces. At night, the NVA would travel down the many rivers to infiltrate the villages and sabotage the highway. From their hidden artillery positions high in the mountains, they shelled the valleys, towns, and airstrips below. Whatever the North Vietnamese Army Forces didn't do, Viet Cong guerrilla bands did for them. The 196th Light Infantry Brigade was the first element of Task Force Oregon to arrive in I Corps area. They began operations to clear the area around Chulai. It was mid-April, 1967. In the forward area, the Chargers of the 196th established bases from which they could patrol the surrounding countryside and coastal waterways. In the rice farming district, the Viet Cong collected unbearable taxes from the farmers and forced the peasants to give them shelter and provide them with hiding places. Under orders from Major General William B. Rawson, commander of Task Force Oregon, the U.S. troops began searching out the VC, who so cleverly concealed themselves in these villages. The job had begun. The second element of Task Force Oregon, the 3rd Brigade of the 25th Infantry Division, took charge of the sector around Duc Pho. Immediately after their arrival, they launched Operation Malheur to rid the district of Viet Cong. During the 3rd week of May, they made contact with a battalion-sized force of Viet Cong. The enemy was well entrenched, and some of the bitterest fighting in the history of Quang Ngai Province took place. By the time Operation Malheur ends, this unit of the 25th Infantry Division has been redesignated the 3rd Brigade of the 4th Infantry. The enemy leaves behind him contaminated rice supplies. Following a search for hidden weapons, the rice is destroyed. Brigadier General Matheson, commander of the 101st Airborne Brigade, arrives at a mountaintop command post where his unit, now part of Task Force Oregon, is about to launch tactical operations in the area around Duc Pho. These combat veterans plan their campaign well, pinpointing objectives in the jungles to the west. The men of the 101st also find the enemy to be well dug in and tenacious. Digging them out and keeping them out is a full-time assignment which keeps the 101st busy from early May until September 1967. Following each encounter, captured enemy weapons are examined, tagged, and sent to brigade headquarters for further study. The enemy himself is closely questioned when captured. U.S. intelligence officers gain much useful information from such interrogation, often leading to capture of additional enemy troops. The troops, fresh from the United States, are trained in the ways of the enemy they soon will have to face. Their instructors are experts on Viet Cong booby traps and tactics. Meanwhile, northward at Chu Lai, men of the 196th are busy evacuating and resettling the inhabitants of various villages, where until now, the Viet Cong have held sway. Of the area's 80,000 residents, only some 30,000 are considered loyal to the South Vietnamese government. The remaining 50,000 are enemy sympathizers. Everything is done to pacify the area. Civic action programs bring medical assistance to remote hamlets where no doctor has ever set foot and where the need for such service is great. The rivers of the region serve as watery highways, not only for the native fishermen of the area, but for the enemy as well. U.S. assault and patrol boats must keep constant vigil for enemy arms shipments, clandestine troop movements, and transport by water of supplies for the enemy infiltrators. Native boats are examined for secret cargoes of guns and ammunition. When satisfied, the troopers head inland. Fishing communities and farms along the way are checked thoroughly for hidden Viet Cong and to evaluate the sympathies of the residents. Often the patrols find the villages deserted. The fact that the inhabitants have fled is considered strong indication of the presence of Viet Cong. Men arriving at Chu Lai as replacements for the 196th Light Infantry Brigade are sent through the brigade's Charger Academy. Here, the new soldiers from stateside are given a rigorous course on how to stay alive in Vietnam.
You've also got to know what size stick it takes to knock him down with. Because if you just stun him, you're in for another behind whooping, right? And we can't go for that out here in the combat zone.
Sophisticated ambush tactics, learned the hard way, are taught by battle-hardened veteran instructors.
Trails over here. Therefore, we couldn't have made these trails. Check my hand here. Now, I cross here. You can see the guy can't look down there and see me, right? We like to cross the road or trail at the bend. Then he will establish one on the far side in case we get hit when we're almost all the way across there. Then they will move out in a particular formation that they're going to be traveling in.
Above Chulai in the Tom Key sector, the men of the 101st Airborne launch Operation Wheeler in mid-September 1967. It is to be one of the longest-running continuous military operations of the war. Confronting the Americans are the elite troops of a North Vietnamese division. Aided by the Viet Cong, they are deeply entrenched throughout the entire district, with headquarters somewhere in the forbidding mountains marking the Laotian border. Every inch of ground is carefully scrutinized by patrols as they probe the area for hidden enemy arms caches and underground fortifications. October 1967 marks a turning point for the men of Task Force Oregon. Troops of the 3rd Brigade, 1st Cavalry Division, Air Mobile, join the task force, and in the mountains and plains of the Chulai district commence Operation Wallawa. Task force units are now in action throughout all of southern I Corps. At the same time, another light infantry brigade, the 198th, arrives in the Duc Pho area. The troops, fresh from the United States, are trained in the ways of the enemy they soon will have to face. Their instructors are experts on Viet Cong booby traps and tactics. Native women may be used by the enemy to trap the unwary. Operation Wallawa really puts the pressure on the enemy. Air support of American ground troops and the use of high-speed Huey gunships impresses the enemy clearly with the meaning of air cavalry. Enemy forces firing from the cover of buildings are neutralized. On the historic occasion of October 26, 1967, the Americal Division is officially reborn. All 5 major Army units, which along with supporting elements made up Task Force Oregon, are represented at the ceremonies in Chulai. Task Force Commander Brigadier General Samuel W. Custer is promoted to Major General and named commander of the new Americal Division. As the colors of the Americal Division are presented to Major General Custer, the division is officially activated under his command. General Westmoreland, then commander of all U.S. military forces in Vietnam, pays tribute to the men of the former task force and reminds them of the Americal Division's proud history in World War II. Two months later, on December 20th, 1967, the last brigade to join the division, the 11th Light Infantry Brigade, arrives at the port of Quy Nhon. Its arrival makes the Americal Division the largest U.S. Army division in Vietnam. The men of the 11th Brigade are assigned to the Duc Pho area for in-country combat training and orientation.
As the new year of 1968 begins, units of the Americal Division are stepping up the pace of their efforts to rid southern I-Corps area of any major enemy threat. By now, Operations Wheeler and Wallowa have been combined. In the Quezon Valley region, west of Chulai, troops of the 1st Cavalry are joined by elements of the 196th Light Infantry Brigade, and together they effectively curtail activities of the North Vietnamese Army. In the northern reaches of Quang Ngai province, hundreds of enemy tunnels are discovered by soldiers of the 198th Light Infantry Brigade and elements of the 11th Light Infantry Brigade, while conducting an Allied forces search and clear operation called Operation Muscatine. In addition to finding valuable intelligence material and weapons in these subterranean passageways, demolitions men are called in and the vast underground complex is destroyed. In the intensified fighting throughout I-Corps, the men of the Americal Division create a valorous new chapter in the division's history. In mid-March, Major General Samuel W. Custer, division commander, bestows medals for exceptional heroism to many men in the field. Easter Sunday, 1968. Religious services are brought to the men of the division wherever their post of duty requires them to be. Spring has come to Vietnam, and by now the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Air Cavalry Division has returned to its air mobile parent division. Gone too are the fighting men of the 3rd Brigade 4th Infantry Division, and Americal is now at its authorized strength. The Americal Division does not go unscathed. In rice paddies, jungles, and mountains, the dark struggle claims the lives of many good men who wear the star-studded shield of blue. For every American lost, the division kills 10 to 15 of the enemy. With each man lost, the division's resolve to win is strengthened, and Americal's fighting men press forward in their mission. Throughout the sweltering summer of 1968, the division steps up its program of training for members of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. The M60 machine gun is phased into the Vietnamese Army weapons system. Allied soldiers are taught to use scout dogs. The training is thorough, and the Vietnamese soldiers are quick to learn. Mortar teams are drilled in exercises to set up and to sight in, plot, and fire the big 81mm U.S. mortars. In the field of medical service, Vietnamese trainees are taught efficient first aid techniques and battlefield medical procedures. Every effort is made to help the soldiers of the Vietnamese Republic increase their capabilities and thus contribute more effectively to the defense of their own freedom. By late summer, units of the 1st Armored Cavalry Regiment, which have been part of the Americal Division since the first of the year, are teaming up with infantry to crush enemy resistance in the division's area of responsibility. The mechanized forces of Operation Burlington Trail scour the Tom Key district, keeping Highway 1 open for all Allied traffic moving northward. In one battle during the operation, men of the 196th, supported by armor, kill 470 North Vietnamese Army troops. And still the sweep continues, driving the enemy forces from the district. Everywhere in the southern I Corps area, the Americal Division wrests control from the enemy and secures the land. By the end of the year, the division has a new commander, Major General Charles W. Geddes. As a task force in 1967, these men were given a job to do and did it well. As a combat division in 1968, their deeds were above and beyond the call of duty. If those who'd gone before, in the jungles of Bougainville and the Philippines, could see them now, the division of yesteryear would seem never to have slept. The spirit of the Southern Cross is again abroad in the land, as some of America's greatest fighting men carry forward the colors of the Americal Division.
Turn me up, Trey.
Dr. Sandra Diozene, Superintendent of Passaic Public Schools.
Hi, my name is Jose Salas. I'm the principal of Passaic High School.
Dr. Edwin Garcia, Assistant Principal at Passaic High School.
Graciela Romero, and I am an Assistant Principal here at Passaic High School. Given this distinction of hosting this Northeast Regional NJROTC competition, where we have, I want to say 12 schools here visiting and competing.
It's amazing. It's amazing to see all the level of the quality of all the teams that are performing, but especially highlighting Passaic. Just really proud of the kids and proud of the work that they put into this competition.
The way that this takes place is with the assistance of the different branches of the military that come and serve as judges.
Drill Sergeant Aldari from the New Jersey RSP here with Drill Sergeant Robinson, supporting the Passaic High School Regional JROTC competition. We are here to support the last portion of the event, which is the knockout game, where we give them a bunch of commands, see if they execute correctly or don't execute when the command is incorrect. And after that, we are going to give them constructive feedback on how they can perform better and what they need to correct on so they can continue to grow in this profession.
It's discipline. Just having that base level foundation of the command and how to execute it properly. It's all base level information and understanding of each command. That's what makes the cadet, the soldier, whoever better at drilling the ceremony.
We're really proud to have this event year after year. It's really truly a testament to our commitment to the Rock US Alliance and our partnership with the community and our good neighbors and city officials. Well, really, this event is our way of celebrating the Lunar New Year with our Korean counterparts. So there is, the normal things you would see, festivities in an event like this. We've got entertainment, both traditional Korean music as well as the 8th Army Band is playing tonight.
We're hosting the Lunar New Year celebration today, really to thank our local community partners, our good neighbors, our partners in the Korean military, the local governments, and the local police.
Once again, thank you for coming to our celebration. May the year of the Blue Dragon bring you all prosperity and good fortune. And may we have a year filled with continued cooperation and friendship.
Hello, my name is Philip. I'm a Netcom G6 intern. I've been here for almost about 2 years. What I love about working for Netcom is that people are willing to share their knowledge to help me grow. And another reason why, choosing Netcom is if something needs to get done, we all work as a team, working with computers and technology and, helping customers out. That's why I love my job.
During the week, we just make sure, maintenance on our equipment, make sure everything's good and ready to train or in case anything ever happens.
Our job is to push dirt and make sure the MRBC slips are good to go and ready for the field and to fight tonight.
So as a 12 Zulu right now, I'm in charge of operations, battalion operations. So I oversee every single operations that all the companies do, whether it is from maintenance, whether it is from combat engineering, constructions, and the day-to-day basic administrations of the battalion.
Engineering is what allows everything to move forward. If you don't have a road, if you don't have a bridge, if you don't have the ability to get supplies on an airfield, if you're not able to dig troops in, there's unnecessary casualties, unnecessary waiting. We're the force that drives everything forward.
There's so many things you can learn, and just because you pick one MOS, one set of engineering skills, you work with all the engineers everywhere in the Army. You learn so many skills, so many things that you can use in the outside world.
This story is hard to tell. Painful. Because our outfit was in training a few weeks ago. Some of the boys who were with us aren't around anymore. They were good men. Good soldiers. They had learned to fight, and they had the guts for fighting. But when it came, it was like a sock on the back of the head. Korea started rough. The first 40 days were a battle for time, with a handful of men against an army. Yes, they were good men, good soldiers. And no story of the Korean War can be told without saying first how well they fought against great odds. In the beginning, there were only a couple of companies from the 24th Division. No brass bands at the airport. A few days before, some of us had been in cities, spending leave time at Fuji, something like that. We weren't scared. We didn't know. We got stuff out of the planes. We moved out. Nobody said, this is it. Nobody said you have arrived in Korea to beat back 5 North Korean communist divisions. Somebody did say, we're here to delay the Reds. Okay, let's go. About 10% of us were veterans. A few roads looked like France, somewhere between Paris and Metz. Mostly the soldiers were young, no battle experience. They smiled a lot. They made the whole lot of us look like good-natured Yanks, glad to see a new town. Some of these boys enlisted to travel. But whoever sees travel posters about Korea, relax, come to the land of the morning calm. At first, the towns looked like any town in this part of the world. The South Korean troops like any soldiers. You know, they worry about the same things and get tired. I mean, tired. We all wanted to ask, what was it like up there? What kind of fighting? Terrain, tactics, guns? As far as we were concerned, those Koreans couldn't talk. We were in a completely foreign country, no time to get acquainted. They emptied a town. Hardly a thing left. You couldn't buy anything, even if you had the time. Which we didn't have. There are two ways of getting to know the terrain: walking over it and feeling how it was underneath. Underneath it was caked and sticky. The tools of a soldier's trade, a shovel and a gun. We had small stuff with us, machine guns, some howitzers. It was hard to believe. 1, 2, 3, we were smack in the middle of a war. Guns ready, aimed north, against an enemy that would look exactly like our friends, the South Koreans. These troops had seen action. They didn't have to speak. Their clothes spoke. Their shoes spoke. Their eyes spoke. We got set. Like I said, when it came, it was fast and it was all around us. They threw everything at us. We answered. We went ahead. It was like D-Day with no warning. Those kids, they became veterans overnight. Tough, hard, nervy. They moved as if they'd been with us all through Germany. There were too many North Koreans with too much heavy equipment, especially tanks. What can men with guts do against tanks? A bazooka was some defense, but there were too many tanks and too few bazookas. Day after day, it was pull back and fight again. There were too many of them. You wouldn't know where they'd come from. The rice paddies would lie quiet. We'd hide in the shadows, trying to look like a hut or a cornfield or a rice paddy. Concealment was one of our weapons. There were too many of them. The boys pulled back, tired as dogs. Because whenever they'd meet the Reds head on, the Reds had enough men to fight us on the front and on our flanks, too. We knew it was hard to face. We were hurting. Kids would drag back so beat up they couldn't be expected to fight for at least several days. Instead of a week at a rest area, we grabbed an hour anywhere. Took a shower. Sat down. Lay down. Seemed like the greatest pleasure in life was to give the feet a chance to breathe. We fell back to new positions. If you looked around at some of the foxholes, you could see a deep respect for those red mortars. Very deep. We were short on men. South Koreans carried our ammo. but we didn't know what some of the others were carrying. Turned out that many of the silent refugees filing along the South Korean roads were North Korean communists in disguise. They'd sneak through our lines and fight us from behind. We caught some, but infiltration caused plenty of casualties. We were going to watch the refugees more carefully from now on. This was a big police job in Korea, the biggest. The attack was full-size, had to be stopped. The United States Army, a small part of it, was here to help. There'd be men in other uniforms fighting with us soon. The whole world had seen this, knew what the score was. Up near the guns, the score was against the enemy. They were losing points, losing time. There were tough decisions, but we had leaders who could make them. General Walker and General Dean. Yes, our outfits were winning. They were holding back the enemy until help could arrive. We didn't feel it yet, but reinforcements were on the way. It takes time to pour a defense program into a small country with almost nothing. Not all the stuff can get there overnight, even in an age when we're used to things traveling 400 or 500 miles an hour. Oh, we needed tanks and jeeps soon. If some of the boys at the front could have heard the winches grind at the port, that would have been sweet music. And if something, television maybe, could have shown us the soldiers who were going to fight with us soon, maybe it would have been easier. As it was, the outfits in the foxholes needed every half-track and howitzer and tank they could get, and more, and the men to go with them. It can take a lot. When your buddies get hit, it hits you inside. Nobody says much. Just so-and-so got it. Or so-and-so has been evacuated. He'll be okay. Or so-and-so's been evacuated. Yes, our mission in the lines was delay. Delay the Red Drive in Korea. Delay it so we could get jeeps. Delay it so we could get weapons carriers and weapons and more ammo. Get it to us, men and equipment, wet or dry. Because it was still rough going for us. And it would stay that way for months, maybe longer, until enough men would be in Korea to strike back. Yes, it was Operation Delay. Ammo was precious. One field artillery battalion against 40 tanks. We'd hold them off for a few hours in a blasting frontal attack. Reds would envelop us on both flanks. Always trouble up ahead, trouble on the side. We drew back south of the Kum River, burned our bridges behind us. People in big cities like Pittsburgh are bothered by smoke. Now, this smoke was black, but it didn't bother us a bit. Yes, smoke can look good when it's where you want it. There were plenty of times when the smoke was too close. Got in your eyes, so you couldn't see anything. You can take a lot. But when your buddies get hit, it hits you inside. Nobody says much. Just so-and-so got it. Or so-and-so has been evacuated. He'll be okay. Or so-and-so's been evacuated. Back of us, units from the 25th Infantry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division were unloading now with baggage. All of it first class, urgent. The tanks were light jobs. They sped north where they were most needed. Smaller than the Russian monsters, but still a wonderful sight. Nothing was too good for a tank in this territory. The boys treated them like babies. They went over them from top to bottom, called them pet names. They cleaned them up better than for inspection. That's cleaning. Their tanks had heavier armor. In a duel, that was their advantage. But our advantage was some fine sharpshooters. They had giants. We had giant killers. Tejan was the worst. Ask anyone where he felt it the worst, and maybe you'll hear a few other names, because it was bad all over. But most guys will say Tejan. Some places we were just outnumbered. But in Tejan, we were outnumbered, outgunned, out-tanked, and outflanked. We pushed out, trying to poke a hole in their lines. No go. We tried another direction. But at the end of every road leading out of Tejan, there were thousands of North Korean troops, plenty of T-34 tanks. It got kind of confusing. There was one hot day, 100 degrees, and we just sat. There was no place to go. It was war, not the way it is in the movies. We were supposed to hold this hot town for 2 days. We held it for 3. It was get out or be trapped in Tejan. We got out. We fought our way out. General Dean stayed behind. He'd still be there. We were all tired, including General Dean. Flank attacks had cut every escape route. We gassed up, ready for a move. We were supposed to hold this hot town for 2 days. We held it for 3. It was get out or be trapped in Tejan. We got out. We fought our way out. General Dean stayed behind. He'd still be there. It was a bad road out of Tejan. Some guys didn't make it. Tejan was burning. Dead town. The men who got out were heroes. The men who didn't get out they were heroes. There's no better word. By this time, the new outfits were in the lines. Fresh, ready to shoot. Everything set just right. Nice to hear the steady crump of your own mortars. Even nicer to hear the howitzers slamming them out. Together, they're terrific. our morale went up 5,000%. We had some pressure now. We turned it on and forced a victory. At a time like this, frontline chow tasted better than pheasant under glass. The rally was short. One outfit might do okay for a day, but on that same day, 5 other sections of the front line would be feeling the enemy's hard blows, the envelopments, the infiltrations. Some of our strongest attacks were by patrols, small groups battered by the enemy, beaten by the mountains, falling down tired. After climbing over half a dozen mountains, it made you more tired just to look at them. Felt like the bear who went over the mountain and saw another mountain. Getting anywhere in Korea was back-breaking work. You did it the Korean way, slowly. You were the bulldozer. No push-pull, click-click up here to throw a bridge across a stream in 4 or 5 hours. Every rock added up. Even the little ones. You worked 2-3 days to put an outfit on the other side of a stream. The rainy season and the Korean super highways didn't help us get around. Wherever we went, we built our way. It was no good having any drag with the engineers. They had their own troubles. You were the engineers. In this battle, you did everything. Build, fight, hold, pull back, and destroy. Whenever we were about to leave a place, we planted it carefully. TNT. Planted it not deep, just deep enough so it would come up the way we wanted it to. The better you plant it, the better it comes up. A second story job. This kind of gardening went on quite frequently. Very relaxing work. We were going to stall them up and down the whole front. And someday there'd be a turnabout that would pay those North Koreans off for what we'd been taking. And then we might have to put back all these bridges. We slowed them, but we couldn't stop them. Fighting is fighting, always rough. But it's rougher when you're forced to pull back. We gave them ground, they gave us time. We used every barrier, every river to make a stand. It was the best way of saving men. They beat us back to the Naktong. We got there early enough to make it across. The Naktong was a pretty useful river. No king ever had a moat around his castle so wide and protected. It felt like a new division was in the line. Plenty of outgoing mail went across the Naktong River. If you've seen combat, you know what it is to have a line, a place to fight from. Well, for the first time in this Korean business, we had something we could call a line. All during the fighting, we had air power. If they had had it, we might have been through. Air power did plenty of damage to everything the enemy had and wanted to bring up. Those guys flew so low, they should have had bayonets on their propellers. In a corner of Korea, a little bigger than a beachhead, we dug in, built a village of foxholes. Only here you couldn't dig too deep on account of the rocks. On this beachhead, a lot of the boys who flew in at the beginning were still around, still smiling. There's waiting in every war. Time to find out where you were, how you were doing. We faced the enemy. We faced ourselves. Our enemies were fanatics. We were believers in one faith, that men can live together peacefully, thinking, feeling, worshiping, each in his own way. You couldn't think about anything for very long when you were planning new moves, new delaying tactics. We pulled down the bridges. We wrecked the roads. The steep hills around us were rugged. We made them more rugged. The enemy. Beyond our foxholes, we unwound some vines of our own with thorns. And beyond the tight ring of our perimeter, the enemy closed in, pushing us hard, threatening the death blow that would throw us back into the sea. How long could we hold? How long? The battle hung in the balance. And then swung to us. A great force reached Korea in a new strategy that gave the North Korean army a battle from three sides at once. Replacements, new units, lively, ready for business. They stole along the hills, slipped up the ridges, looking for a soft spot in the enemy's hard shell. We gave it to them steady, all up and down the line, all at once. The air dusty, smoky. This was what we used to get when we first hit Korea. Victory never comes easily. You have to be in a fight to see how tough it is. See how in an attack, guys stumble back, needing others to look after them. Always plenty of trouble. It takes men and machines to knock out a strong enemy. And as you go forward, you can expect to lose some of those who start out with you. Yes, some went back, their feet heavy, their steps slow. Kids who became men, men whose hollow-faced look showed that they'd been in the line too long. You can't count on a straight road to victory. Sometimes it winds, goes down, goes up. Sometimes you're forced to detour. You could pick out the new troops. They walk different. Another outfit. But if you gave them the once-over, they were like the fellas in our outfit when we landed. The same smiling Yanks, making the best of everything. And a little better than that. We battled for time in Korea and won. We had the right men. Good men. Good soldiers.
Did you know that spouses can apply for the AER scholarship year-round? Contact the AER office at 520-533-5312 for more information. Soldiers helping soldiers.
cannot encompass spirit, nor can memory truly be frozen in the shrines that men erect. But in granite and marble, in fieldstone and clay and bronze, we symbolize our desire to preserve what is enduringly valuable in our lives and in our honored history, to remind ourselves of what men have been willing to do and be and give for liberty. The American soldier is so honored, and always has been. In this tomb at Arlington lie the bodies of the unknowns of World War I. World War II, and Korea. Symbols of all the heroes who fell in the wars of the nation's maturity. Their memory, and the memory of all their brothers in arms before them, are enshrined in a chain of tribute which stretches back across the developing story of the United States. Back to the beginning of the nation. And of the Army which has fought to preserve it. The most tragic of all wars, that of brother against brother, was forced upon the nation. These were the first, the embattled farmers, as the poet Emerson called them. At Concord Bridge, they fired the shot heard round the world. They began their adventure as a group of individuals united at first only by something intangible in the emerging American spirit, a sense of the importance of independence, a belief that a man should have something to say about his own affairs. The Continental Congress gave their struggle a direction that was breathtaking in its audacity and sweeping in its vision of man's rights. Not mere rebellion, the creation of a new and uniquely free nation. Destiny provided a leader to match the peril and need of the time. And under him, through 8 years haunted with incredible hardship, were shaped the victories of Trenton and Saratoga, and finally, of Yorktown. The dream of American liberty at last took life. A constitutional bedrock of political morality and religious freedom gave this dream a base, an anchor for the soaring aspirations of generations to come. The acquisition of vast new lands through the Louisiana Purchase provided room for a period of vigorous growth. The people used the peaceful years to settle new territories. But before the nation was 30 years old, war came again. The War of 1812. In this conflict with the British, the central issue was the rights of American seamen, and the war was primarily a naval one. The Battle of New Orleans was the only important action by ground forces in this war, and it was actually fought after the war was officially over. Here, the Army learned more about military tactics. The nation learned something about its need for a professional army to stand ready against attack. And the attacking forces learned the folly of underestimating the stubborn resourcefulness of men defending their freedom. Now there followed nearly half a century of expansion as the nation's frontier was pushed ever farther and farther westward. In retrospect, the simple confidence of those pioneers in the face of the hardships, uncertainties, and dangers which lay before them is amazing. and their achievement a lasting and inspiring heritage. Americans had begun the work of making a continental United States a reality. Now Texas wrote a preface to the next chapter in America's history, and a mission compound whose name might otherwise have become merely an obscure historical footnote became a synonym for endurance and heroism. This was the Alamo. Texas won its independence after a long and bloody struggle, during which a band of 187 Americans met death and won enduring fame at the Alamo. The frontiers expanded, and the flow of the nation's commerce grew. The midpoint of the 19th century was reached and passed in peace. But as the late 1850s approached, a storm of violent opinion was building, which would threaten the very unity of the nation. The most tragic of all wars, that of brother against brother, was forced upon the nation. Soldiers of both sides went into battle secure in the belief in their cause. The Confederate soldier had behind him the unified effort of a culture that was actually a way of life. He also had a superb military organization. Perhaps more than these, he had a hot, defiant pride, a formidable confidence that he would win. He fought with a magnificence that did him high credit, and in the end, it was not his spirit or skill, but his resources that failed him. The Union Army suffered at first from overconfidence and a lack of unity. But in the refining fire of combat, these were done away. And by mid-war, the Union soldier emerged as one of the most effective fighters in military history. This war was many things. It was the first modern war in terms of weaponry, transport, technology. It was a war of spectacular plans, brilliant in their execution. Its campaigns still provide lessons for students of tactics. In human terms, the war was a national tragedy. Viewed historically, it preserved the nation. Today, a battlefield like Gettysburg becomes a many-acred national shrine where silence and memory command the ground so torn by the fury of shot and shell a century ago. Where living men fought and suffered, bronze and stone now stand, sentinels of a nation's conscience, telling over and over for every succeeding age how dearly bought is the unity which makes this nation one and indivisible. And at Arlington, a memorial to the Civil War dead expresses what might be said of all American soldiers of every war. Not for fame or reward, not for place or rank, not lured by ambition or goaded by necessity, but in simple obedience to duty as they understood it. These men suffered all, sacrificed all, dared all, and died. America's advancement, once again made secure through the courage and sacrifice of her fighting men, stretched into the West and into the future with limitless promise. The two great oceans were to be linked. The continent was to become one great nation in geographical as well as philosophical fact. The great reach westward was met by the West reaching eastward. All this did not, however, go unopposed. The Indians, who had resisted the settlement of the new continent from the beginning, had grown bold and powerful while the nation was absorbed in its struggles for the Union. To the soldier fell the task of bringing safety to the Great West. It was a harsh assignment. The Army's Western forces totaled only some 10,000 men, scattered widely across the vast plains. This 10,000 faced an enemy which numbered 250,000. He did more than his duty, wrote one Army general of this soldier of the West. He did more than his duty. And in the doing, he wrote a page of history which will be read and thrilled to so long as men prize courage. Still, much of the time, as always, the soldier's duty was carried out unheralded, in tedium, hardship, and isolation, unrelieved by the excitement of combat action. Under vast skies, he did a vast job. By the end of the 19th century, the West and the internal security of the entire country were stabilized. From ocean to ocean, the American nation stretched, strong and free. The beginning of the new century brought rumblings of a much greater challenge and much farther from our shores. America hoped to remain uninvolved, but that was not to be. The doughboy went into his first European combat experience full of confidence and idealism. He was determined to save the world for democracy. It was an agonizing war of stalemate and negligible gains of ground bitterly fought for. A war of trenches and barbed wire cutting across the heart of France. New weapons brought to the battlefield a deadliness never known before. He fought well through the Holocaust of Cantigny, Château-Thierry, Belleau Wood, the Marne, the Argonne Forest. Steadily, stubbornly, he made his way across the torn and bloody ground. He turned the tide of battle. The price he willingly paid won him victory and an immortal place in the memory of generations of soldiers yet to come. Now came years of burgeoning industrial power, of swift development, spurred at first by the belief that the war just ended had in fact ended all war. Within 2 decades, however, this industrial might would be desperately needed. By the late 1930s, America could not mistake the shape of things to come. Knowing time might be short, the nation began to mobilize. Around a small nucleus of trained professionals, a mighty fighting force had to be built. A force that would use combat skills that were new and untried in battle so far as American troops were concerned. The enemy had shown the effectiveness of such modern skills all too clearly in Europe. By December of 1941, all time for preparation had run out. With what there was left, of what she had ready, America fought back. For some, whose stubborn resistance had bought priceless time for their country, the months ahead, in captivity, would sorely test their fortitude, their moral stamina, and their faith in the ultimate victory of their free nation. History would record that they had that fortitude, that stamina and faith, and that their faith was justified. History would record, too, how their comrades in arms devised and put into practice techniques of assault that had not been in the book, until the necessities of a global purpose called forth the needed answers. The massed amphibious assault, first perfected in the Pacific and in Italy, would be put to use later in the greatest landing ever attempted in the history of man. D-Day, the 6th of June, 1944. The task which had been set for them came perilously close to being impossible. Somehow, they accomplished it. He worked with weapons which were ever more powerful, more complex, more varied and effective. His firepower had become impressive indeed. Now the long and bitter time of fighting in Europe was over, and all attention turned to the Pacific. Intensified effort from the air reflected our wish to avoid the cruelly costly prospect of a land invasion of Japan. A new era began the morning a single bomber, instead of the usual hundreds, delivered an ultimatum. On board the battleship Missouri, General Douglas MacArthur accepted the surrender. World War II was at an end. Hundreds of thousands came home. A great many others did not. And on far beaches lay rusting reminders of flame and bitter violence. Time and the sea would erase them, but the nation's debt to the men who brought them there would remain. The growing complexity of warfare brought changes in the Army. The variety of skills and specialties needed to support its overall mission grew, and its men kept pace with this dramatic growth. The days when a soldier needed only to keep his eyes and ears open, his mouth shut, and his rifle clean were long and permanently gone. Nevertheless, the prime mission of the soldier, to be ready to deliver swift and effective force against any threat to his nation's security, remained, and his readiness to meet any new challenge was kept sharp. In June of 1950, from among the beautiful peaks and valleys of Korea, the new challenge came, and the response was unequivocal. At the start, there were not enough of them, a familiar situation, but they used what they had to good effect. They kept victory beyond the grasp of the aggressors while reinforcements rallied. In the United States, the citizen, as always, came through. By the tens of thousands, he shouldered the responsibility for doing his part in maintaining the freedom he'd been born into. He did himself and the nation proud service when the need arose. He learned what he had to learn. He mastered the bewildering swiftness of the change from civilian to soldier. He gained the pride that comes to a group of individuals when, through hard work, they become an effective, smoothly coordinated team. In Korea, after a year of swift seesaw movement, the fighting settled into a stalemate. Constant patrolling, endless fighting over the same bits of battered earth. These taxed the soldier's endurance. Still, he kept at his job, to convince the enemy that he could not win. In the end, he made his point that armed aggression against free men would be met and thwarted wherever and whenever it might appear. By the late 1950s, the soldiers' training was more widely varied than ever before in history. He learned to be at home in the steaming jungle. He mastered the equipment, the tactics, the specialized techniques required for combat in the Arctic snow. He swallowed the dust and endured the heat of desert operations where the temperature was 115 in the shade, and there was no shade. He worked with weapons which were ever more powerful, more complex, more varied and effective. His firepower had become impressive indeed. Today, there are new challenges to be faced. Since the time of the Minutemen at Concord Bridge, much has changed. The tools, the technology, the mobility and firepower wielded by the soldier of today would seem fantastic to men who went into battle armed only with flintlocks and a stubborn dream. Much has changed, but much remains the same. Flintlocks have become museum pieces, but the dream of the men who bore them still animates their counterparts in the 20th century. The times have changed. The determination of free men to remain free has not. Today, as in the beginning, the high intent of a nation depends for its chance of fulfillment upon the man who is ready to give whatever may be needed, the soldier. He is worthy, today as then, of the grateful tribute of his people, because he is, today as then, ready. Ready to redeem in full measure the pledge which echoes and re-echoes throughout the soldier's heritage. For freedom, our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
Eager Defender is a multilateral, multi-nation exercise with the nation of Kuwait, primarily focused on the defense of Kuwait, but also contributing to the larger security of the Gulf states in the Arabian Gulf region.
This year was special because it introduced a new concept, bringing in partners from our GCC as well as the United States Army to conduct a combined exercise on Palaka Island.
Eager Defender is not just an exercise for us. It is a testament to our shared commitment for a safer world.
For the U.S. service side, it provides us in the Army to work alongside our sister services like the Marine Corps, the Navy, and the Air Force, as well as to integrate our GCC partners into our Joint Operations Center, trade doctrine, and train how we fight as a military force.
We stand ready not only to support our neighbors in the Gulf region, but also to respond to the needs across the Middle East and provide security and stability to all of our partners.
The U.S. Army Garrison Japan's Directorate of Emergency Services is getting new patrol cars for the 88th and 901st Military Police Detachments on Camp Sama.
It will drastically improve our mission capabilities. The things that most people will see is that the appearance of the military police vehicles is going to change.
Logistics Readiness Center Honshu employees are helping prep 4 of the vehicles for use, focusing now on updating the color and design of the vehicles.
Army regulations say they have to be a certain size with the lettering, color, and visual.
LRC Honshu, which follows under the 4th Army Field Support Brigade, helped the garrison procure the vehicles. Leadership from both teams work together closely in order to navigate the procurement process for a fleet life cycle replacement.
Although we may be in different units, we have one mission. Working together, we were able to bring in all the experience and knowledge and efforts to make it happen.
We did a lot of talking. We did a lot of discussion with many people. I am just happy that we managed to see the success that we did.
I'm happy because these are 2010s, 2011s, so they're not terribly old, but we drive them all the time and we work 12-hour shifts. So I think it just takes a toll on them. So I'm just glad that our command has gotten us new vehicles to drive.
Whatever you need to get the job done, they're 100% full support.
The LRC Honshu team will also install police package equipment that consists of emergency lights, sirens, and radios on these patrol cars. And they said 8 more vehicles will be coming in soon.
We will continue to work with Garrison and fight for additional money, funding to replace the remaining vehicles and to fill all of our authorizations. And then we'll move on to the next project to enhance this community.
For U.S. Army Garrison Japan Public Affairs, I'm Aya Watsushi.
Welcome to Construction, the podcast of the Tulsa District U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I'm here today with Kim Sorrells. Kim is a design manager in the hydropower section of the engineering branch of our engineering division here at the Tulsa District U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Kim, for taking the time to sit down with us and talk about what you do here at the Tulsa District on a day-to-day basis.
Great, thank you.
So, Kim, tell us about what a design manager in hydropower does.
So in hydropower, it's the same as if we're in the military or civil program. We basically execute the projects. So sometimes we like to describe it as herding cats. So we work with the PDT to make sure the project is developing, it's on schedule, it's within budget, everyone has the funding they need to do their job. So it's really just organizing the team to get that project execution through.
And the PDT, that's a project delivery team?
Yes. Yeah.
And with regard to hydropower, what kind of projects are you working on right now?
We have a whole plethora of types of projects. We have 8 plants within the district. So our projects could be something like an intake gate, repairing that, a bridge crane. It could be a full generator rewind. So we have small projects from painting projects to large projects like a full replacement. So it comes, we work with the Hydroelectric Design Center and we give them a short list of projects, and each year they choose which projects are funded, and we just go from plant to plant and whatever their critical needs are.
How many hydropower dams do we have in the
We
district?
have 8. Sometimes we support Southwest Division or Little Rock as well.
Is there one project that's with hydropower right now that's taking up the majority of your time?
Yeah, we I've done a lot of work with Denison. That's kind of been the plan just naturally I've been working with. We just kicked off a full roof replacement for them. So that's been nice to see that from the beginning and now moving into construction. But currently it's the Denison wall. So they have a historic full timber truss wall out there that is in pretty bad disrepair. It's had some water infiltration and really needs full replacement. So we worked as a team to investigate whether it was worth repairing or replacing the wall. And we sent some inspection teams out there and decided as a team to replace it. So right now our team is developing a RFP, which is a request for proposal. And we'll do a design build project and work with an AE for them to design the wall. But it's neat because we really get to use innovation on this project. Replacing the wall is interesting because it's not a regular shape. It's not just a standard straight up and down wall. It's kind of a trapezoid.
Really?
And they intended to expand the powerhouse when they built it. And it's a historic structure. So we've also had to work with the Texas Historic Commission to make sure we're doing everything in line and following. It has kind of an Art Deco style to it.
Oh, wow.
So it's a really neat plant out there. And the wall itself is beautiful. It's just, it's old and it's been hit with a lot of water. So it needs to be replaced. But there's some engineering difficulty in that and trying to decide the footprint. Do we want to replace the same or try to put just a standard vertical wall in? But you've got some structural components of that you have to make sure how it fits with the existing structure and that it'll stand on its own. So it's an interesting project. And like I said, right now we're developing the RFP, but we'll work with an AE to get that designed and out there. So
What's an AE?
Just an architectural engineering firm.
Okay. How'd you end up in what did you do before hydropower? Because I remember we talked back in 2020.
Yeah, right.
And you were doing the inspections of structures or evaluations of structures for potential COVID buildings or COVID medical support. What have you been up to in the last several years?
Well, I've been with the military program as a structural engineer for about 4 years. And about a year ago, almost to the day, I moved over to hydropower. So just moving into a different role on the other side of the house. And so I was doing structural engineering design. I designed the AIT building out at Fort Sill, and that's the first one should be getting close to ending construction, and they're starting the second phase of that. And I decided to move over to work with some other groups. So when I was in structures, I just worked mainly with the military design folks. Now I get to work with acquisition planning. I work with contracting. I work with PPMD. I work a little closer with the customer and the powerhouse out there, which is neat. So it's really seeing the execution side of the project, and some things I've I've said throughout the year. I'm new to this side, so I'm learning some of the strategy of this, but it's neat to see. I was used to just handing off the project and then whatever happens happens, and now I'm part of that what happens and making sure it actually gets awarded and goes to construction.
Is that fulfilling?
It is. It's nice to see your work come to fruition, because it's one thing to design it on paper and do the math and calculations and drawings, but to actually see it built and work with the folks. And I think the most rewarding part is working with the powerhouse and seeing. I think the powerhouse manager out there, when we got the roof awarded, he said something like he can retire now because he never thought that project would come through. And that makes me feel great that I can work to get something done that they've needed for a while.
Yeah. And I mean, like, hydropower is so interesting because it's just got so many quote unquote moving parts, I guess. But I mean, to see when you were talking about the wall that you all are trying to get replaced, what is that, a wall in the powerhouse, or is it? Oh, it is a powerhouse wall.
Yes. So it's like I said, because the footprint is kind of strange. It's on the east end of the wall, so it's almost like they just stuck a piece of plywood at the end of the powerhouse with the intent to remove it and build more concrete structure. And then probably within the last 20 years, they've decided, no, we don't need any more generators. We're not going to expand this. It was never meant to exist this long. It was built as a temporary wall. So it's full floor down to the lower level up to the top. So all in all, it's a little over 80 feet. It's a pretty big wall. But it's interesting in the construction side of it because the floors aren't necessarily aligning. So we've got some gaps and have to be a little creative on what we do there.
How do you deal with stuff like that with where you have to be quote unquote creative?
Yeah, it's interesting because we're not the ones that are designing it. So we have to describe it in a way that someone else can pick it up and understand where they need to be creative and what they need to think through. So we've been out to the site multiple times, taking pictures. We've pulled as-built drawings. Our structural engineer has layered some of those, and they're a little difficult to read. So we've done some section drawings of our own to make sure it's understood clearly. And then we go through a pretty intense review process. So we hand it to someone else and to see if they can understand the way we've described it. So it's almost like a game of telephone, and which is hard because you're asking someone, I like the bring me a rock example. Well, if I say bring me a rock, you might bring me a boulder, and I'm like, oh no, I needed a smaller rock. So we have to really describe it. It needs to be this size, it needs to be this shape, it needs to be this type of rock, and very clear about those requirements and what they are. But it also gives us an opportunity to be innovative with things like materials or the type of wall, if it's kind of a prefabricated or almost like a Lego set that can be built up, or if it's a cast in place concrete. So we're intentional about the needs and parameters